Chapter 2094. Husband, Fu Zhu said with infatuation. Wouldn't it be great if the three of us could enjoy such beautiful scenery together? Wouldn't it be great if we could cultivate together, and enjoy the scenery when we're free? Why, create a heavenly talisman sect? That's right. Once Big Sister and I reach the foundation establishment stage, it would be best for us three foundation establishment cultivators to take charge of a sect. It's a bit too early for that. Fu Xiao looked at her sister and probed. A smile appeared at the corner of his mouth as he looked left and right at his two equally beautiful wives. My two wives are absolutely right. However, your husband has his own plans. I'm going to explain it to my two wives. We'll listen to your explanation, Fu Zhu and Fu Xiao said with a smile. From their tone, even if Songde explained it casually, they wouldn't pursue the matter. If the three of us were to cultivate by ourselves, we would be able to relax. But don't you think that the three of us are too weak? Even if the three of us reach foundation establishment, I'm afraid we won't be a match for Mount Jinhua. Your husband created the Heavenly Talisman sect and all the disciples are your husband's helpers. If they can cultivate to a high level of qi refining, they'll be your support. Even if we face Mount Jinhua that day, our Heavenly Talisman sect won't be at a disadvantage, Songde said with a smile. Moreover, our strength is in yellow talismans. We can cultivate while refining yellow talismans. Since we can cultivate and refine yellow talismans at the same time, why can't we teach our disciples while refining yellow talismans? This is killing three birds with one stone. Yes, you're right. Fu Zhu and Fu Xiao agreed as expected. Moreover, your husband. How can a small sect in a corner of the main kingdom be my goal? Songde's eyes lit up. Your husband wants to make this Heavenly Talisman sect one of the top sects in the Dawn Rain continent. What Shanghua sect? What Changbai sect? Mount Jinhua isn't even worthy of carrying my Heavenly Talisman sect's shoes. Hee, your husband has even thought of a title for your baby. Ah? Is that so? Husband, please tell us. Fu Zhu's and Fu Ai's faces lit up. I like cultivators with lofty ambitions like you, husband. Husband will definitely dominate the Dawn Rain continent in the future, he proudly said. After I become pregnant, I will be called Taoist Heavenly Talisman. What do you all think? Awesome! A look of longing appeared on the Fu puppet's face. My husband's title is truly resounding. In the future, my Heavenly Talisman sect will definitely follow Taoist Heavenly Talisman's name throughout the entire Dawn Rain continent. Husband is truly a genius. Fu Zhu also praised. Mistress. Just as Fu Zhu and Fu Puppet were intoxicated, a panicked voice came from behind them. Displeased, he turned his head around and saw a third layer qi refining disciple flying unsteadily towards him from the mountain behind the bamboo hut. Li Su-kun! Why are you in such a sorry state? The talisman puppet flew up and scolded. Didn't I teach you? You are a disciple of my Heavenly Talisman sect, and also a disciple of a cultivation sect. You should have the temperament of not being frightened by a mountain. Yes, disciple understands. Li Su-kun was a child of about 10 years old. Panting heavily, he replied. Disciple has an urgent matter to report to sect master. Can't you just send a message, talisman? Why are you so panicked? Songlun said in a very imposing manner. He had the bearing of a sect master. Disciple is slow-witted. Disciple panicked, and forgot. Li Su-kun scratched his head in embarrassment. Yes, I will remember this matter for now. There will be no next time. Songlun nodded. What's the urgent matter? All right, sect master understands. Li Su-kun bowed and said. That Su Zhiqing secretly escaped from the mountain. Su Zhiqing, why did he escape from the mountain? The Fu puppet was stunned. Su Zhiqing had the best aptitude among all the disciples, and was also a disciple she taught with great care. Did he do something wrong? All right, mistress understands. Li Su-kun said anxiously. This Su Zhiqing is not an ordinary disciple. He is a disciple of the Su family in Xian City. Ah? Xian City's Su family? How? How is this possible? Songlun was stunned and his face turned pale. How did you know? Sect Master, Li Shukun said with a sad face. Last night this disciple and the others drank some fruit wine and were a little drunk. That Su Zhiqing accidentally let slip and talked about the Su family. At that time, this disciple and the others didn't care. Even now, this disciple still thinks that he was bragging. But Su Zhiqing's behavior today was a little strange. He often looked absent-minded. Just now, Lu Xian jokingly said a few words to him, and he immediately became angry. He knocked Lu Xian to the ground and rushed out of the mountain gate. Seeing this, I felt that what Su Zhiqing said last night must be true. I see. The Fu puppet gnashed her teeth and said, No wonder that guy kept making mistakes and made me angry. It turns out that he was afraid that I would kill him with one palm. Husband, just you wait. I will chase after him and kill him. We must not let the Su family, who also refine yellow talismans, know that our heavenly talisman sect has the means to refine talismans. What? You told Su Zhiqing that our husband can refine talismans? Not only was Songlun shocked, but Fu Zhu also blamed her. I saw that guy looking down on our heavenly talisman sect and couldn't help but tell him. The Fu puppet said shamefully. I will go now. The Fu puppet knew the danger of this matter and hurriedly flew away. Fu Zhu, you also accompany the Fu puppet. You must not let the Su family know about this. Songlun was also anxious and ordered. Yes, rest assured, husband. Fu Zhu nodded. Just as she was about to fly away, another panicked voice came from Li Sukun. Master's wife, it's bad, it's bad. Lu Xian, why are you panicking? Did someone barge into White Bamboo Mountain? Songlun looked at the disciple with a bruised nose and purple eyes. His face showed a trace of panic, but he still asked calmly. Yes. How did Sect Master know? Lu Xian's injured face showed a trace of surprise. I didn't expect the Su family to come so early. The Fu puppet said hatefully. It seems like they planned this from the start. No, it's not the Su family. Lu Xian argued. At this moment, two divine senses swept over and a voice laughed. Is this Xiao Hua of the Heavenly Talisman sect? Please come to the front mountain to meet us. Foundation Establishment Cultivator? Songlun's face changed greatly. He barely cultivated his divine senses and could not reach far. How could he not know when two divine senses swept over? Lu Xian. You said it's not the Su family, then who is it? Fu Zhu asked anxiously. Lu Xian said loudly. I heard that it's the Fu family of Jinhua Mountain. Ah? Fu Zhu and the Fu puppet were shocked and their faces turned pale. Since the Fu family of Jinhua Mountain came, the divine senses must belong to Fu Yunhua. With Fu Yunhua's hatred for Songlun and his desire to eliminate them, how could the three of them survive? Husband, we will hold them back for you. You should leave. The Fu puppet's face showed determination. Only when you are alive can our heavenly talisman sect have any value. You still want to leave? Fu Feng had already flown up to White Bamboo Mountain. There were no formations or restrictions on White Bamboo Mountain, so how could it stop these people? Elder Fu? The Fu puppet's beautiful eyes swept across and saw that most of the people were familiar. There were only two Foundation Establishment cultivators that she did not recognize. A hint of joy flashed in her eyes and she hurriedly went up to greet them. Puppet was wondering who it was. Elder, you are here? Cough, cough, Fu puppet. You are no longer a disciple of the Fu family, so don't call me that. Fu Feng coughed a few times, feeling very uncomfortable in his heart. He had watched the Fu puppets and Fu Zhu grow up, especially the Fu puppets. Since they were young, they were very clever and lively, and were doted on by some elders. Fu Feng was one of them. Elder. The Fu puppet's mouth flattened and her eyes turned red. She was about to cry. Humph, you are already a cultivator in the 11th layer of Qi refining. Do you still think you are a teenager? Do you still think you are in Jinhua Mountain? Lu Yun sneered and glanced at Fu Feng. Lu Yun was a guest elder, and was not very close to the disciples of the Fu family. This was one of the reasons why Fu Yunbei sent her here. Yes, Fu Zhu, Fu Puppet, do you know your crime? Fu Feng understood Lu Yun's meaning and nodded. Fu Zhu and Fu Puppet have long regretted it. It is just that I have restricted their freedom, and they are unable to leave. Fu Feng rushed to say. Husband! Fu Zhu and Fu Puppet shouted. We are one with our husband. How can you say that we are forced? Shut up! Yun Chi Feng sneered. It is not up to you to say what is true. Then Yun Chi Feng turned his head and said, Fu Feng, we have accompanied you to White Bamboo Mountain. The foundation establishment cultivator you mentioned did not appear. The Misty Clouds sect has done what we promised you. Moreover, the Misty Clouds sect has undergone a great change. We need to hurry back to the sect. We cannot stay here any longer. Yes, thank you for your help, seniors. Fu Feng said goodbye to Yun Chi Feng. He knew that they had done what they promised. Yun Tingyu was dead, and the only connection between the Misty Cloud sect and the Golden Mount Hua had been lost. He could no longer keep them here. Goodbye, seniors. Yes. Yun Chi Feng waved his sleeves and prepared to leave. Fu Feng's eyes flashed, and he was happy. He was now at the peak of Qi refining level 12, which was the same as Fu Feng and the others. He was most afraid of these two foundation establishment cultivators. Once Yun Chi Feng and Yun Qing Lai left, he might be able to resist. However, just as Yun Qing Lai and Yun Chi Feng flew up, another two spiritual senses swept in from outside. A cold voice sounded. Humph, which fellow cultivator has also come to White Bamboo Mountain? Could it be that you want to make trouble with the Su family of Xian City? Who? Yun Chi Lai and Yun Chi Feng were stunned. Their faces became alert. They clapped their hands and took out two magic weapons. They stopped in midair. Oh no! Fu Feng knew that Su Zhiqing's clansmen had come. He probably had no chance to escape. -8. Chapter 2095. Yun Chi Lai and Yun Chi Feng looked up and saw two early-stage foundation establishment cultivators flying towards them. One of them was a fat man with big ears and a big body. His Taoist robe was rolled up, revealing his hairy arms. The other was a female cultivator. She was about 40 years old, and her skin was pale. Although she was not as beautiful as a painting, her small nose and delicate eyebrows made her look comfortable. Su family of Xian City? How should I address you? Yun Chi Feng frowned and cupped his hands. I am Yun Chi Feng from Misty Cloud sect. This is I's junior brother, Yun Qing Lai. Oh? So they are disciples of Misty Cloud sect. No wonder. The plump cultivator's eyes flashed with understanding. He nodded and said, This humble Taoist is Su Hong. Then, he looked at the female cultivator beside him and said, This is Zhong Yejing from Zhong family of Yun City, Fairy Zhong. I greet the two of you. Zhong Yejing followed behind Su Hong. The two of them stopped a few feet away from Yun Chi Lai and Yun Chi Feng and greeted them. After the two sides greeted each other, there was a moment of silence. They seemed to be thinking about how to phrase their greetings. Yun Chi Lai looked at Yun Chi Feng and said loudly, Both of you are cultivators from Meng country. Why are you here at White Bamboo Mountain? That's strange. Fellow Yun, White Bamboo Mountain is Meng country's spiritual mountain. Why can't we come here? Su Hong raised his eyebrows and asked. Since you two fellow Taoists are here, I have the same purpose as you. Yun Chi Lai and Yun Chi Feng looked at each other, a hint of understanding flashing in their eyes. They knew that their purpose was different from the other parties. In other words, Fu Feng was hiding some of the truth. They did not come to the White Bamboo Mountain to capture the 3 Fu family members who had betrayed the Golden Mount Hua and brought them back to the country of Xi. Yun Chi Feng glanced at the confused Fu Feng and then looked at the calm Su Hong. He smiled and said to Su Hong, Since fellow Taoist Su knows that we have the same goal, then junior brother and I are one step ahead of you. Fellow Taoist Su, shouldn't you turn back? Humph! How could it be that simple? Su Hong sneered. Although I'm late, I've sent a Su clan disciple to spy in the Heavenly Talisman sect many years ago. Otherwise, how could I have known that there was an invisibility talisman here? Fellow Taoist Yun, your Misty Cloud sect is also a talisman crafting sect. I'm sure you know the importance of these invisibility talismans, right? Do you think I can turn back? Ah? Invisibility talisman? Yun Qinglai and Yun Qingfeng's faces lit up. They looked at each other, and then at Fu Feng. Fu Feng's face was pale, and Lu Yun's mouth was bitter. They clearly understood. The Misty Cloud sect and this Su family were both talisman crafting aristocratic families. Their objective of this trip, to bring the talisman crafting method back to Mount Jinhua, was most likely impossible to achieve. Sure enough, when Su Hong saw that Yun Qinglia's expression wasn't right, he immediately came to a realization and felt some regret in his heart. Could it be that they didn't do it for the invisibility talisman? Fellow Taoist Fu! Yun Qingfeng sneered. So this is the reason why fellow Taoist Fu came to White Bamboo Mountain. No wonder you wanted to invite us over. You wanted me to be your shield. Arresting the defectors is just a cover. I'll let the two seniors know. Fu Feng was a little flustered. Junior's main objective is to arrest these three disciples. The invisibility talisman isn't the main point. If the four seniors are willing, I'll make the decision. You can copy the crafting method of the invisibility talisman and take it away. Oh? When Yun Qinglai heard this, he was even more delighted. Without having to fight, he could obtain the crafting method of the invisibility talisman. Why not? Then, he looked at Su Hong and Zhong Yejing. Haha, I was invited by fellow Taoist Su. I'll listen to your orders, Zhong Yejing said with a smile. Of course, if fellow Taoist Su is willing to give it to I will accept it. Okay, we'll do as you say. Su Hong thought for a while and beamed with joy. Hearing this, Fu Feng's heart finally settled down. But at this moment, Su Hong spoke again. Haha, other than the invisibility talisman, I also have the Qingyun talisman. It's used by disciples at the peak of Qi refining stage 12. I wonder if the four seniors are interested? Ah? You have the Qingyun talisman? Yun Qinglai and the others were even more perceptive. They knew that the Qingyun talisman was a spirit talisman. It was a necessity for disciples in the cultivation sections. It was also one of the methods to nurture outstanding disciples in the foundation establishment stage. If Yun Qinglai had the Qingyun talisman, his magic power would be more than 30% stronger. The invisibility talisman and the Qingyun talisman are both with me, Su Hong said with a smile. If the four seniors want it, I can take it out from my hiding place at any time and let you copy it. However, I have a condition. Is it to kill these Qi refining cultivators? Or to drive them away? Su Hong was the first to speak. His gaze had already landed on Lu Yun and Fu Feng. Of course it's to kill them. Leave no one alive, Su Hong said coldly. Husband. Fu Zhao and Fu Zhu were shocked. My two wives, if you let them go, your husband's life will be in danger, Su Hong explained. Although Fu Feng will let you go and perhaps bring your husband back to the Golden Mount Hua, will Fu Yunhua let your husband live? My wives, don't blame your husband for being ruthless. There are no cultivators in the Dawn Rain continent who are not ruthless. Fu Zhu and Fu Zhao were silent. They knew that Su Hong was telling the truth. All right. Su Hong laughed and clapped his hands. Just as he was about to take out his magic weapon, Fu Feng, Lu Yun, and the others were scared out of their wits. Fellow Taoist Su, Yun Qingfeng frowned and said, Please wait for a moment. What? Fellow Taoist Yun, do you have something else to say? Su Hong said coldly. Zhong Yejing, who was beside him, followed Su Hong's gaze and pressed her hand on her storage bag. Yes, I have received the sect master's dying order to send Fu Feng and the others safely to the White Bamboo Mountain. Although I have already completed the sect master's task, but if I take their lives now, wouldn't it be a disgrace to my sect master in the afterlife? Yun Qingfeng said. In my opinion, why don't we drive Fu Feng and the others away and make them swear a hard oath that they will never come to the White Bamboo Mountain to look for Su Hong? Wouldn't that be perfect? Sect Master Yun's dying order? Su Hong rolled his eyes, feeling a little troubled. If it weren't for some dying order, he would have just fought with Yun Qinglai and the others. However, the sect master's dying order was a great honor for a sect. If Su Hong forced himself to fight with Yun Qinglai and the others, it would mean that he was going against the entire Misty Cloud sect. The Misty Cloud sect was nothing, but if the entire sect went against the Su family, it would be really troublesome. He wouldn't be able to explain it to his family. Sect Master Fu, what do you think? Su Hong looked at him with a smile. This old man can make a decision for you. These aura refining cultivators absolutely won't cause you any trouble in the future. Furthermore, if you manage to avoid today's matter, you can very well move your sect to another place. How could these cultivators possibly find you? Actually, let me tell you, you should cultivate secretly. Why are you dreaming about becoming a sect master? This isn't a heavy burden that an aura refining cultivator can undertake. -8. Chapter 2096. This? Songda hesitated. What? You don't want to listen to me? Su Hong's face turned cold. Then I'll leave right now. I don't want the Qingyun talisman or the invisibility talisman. I'd like to see if you can keep those two talismans. Can you keep your life? Fine. Songda gritted his teeth. I'll listen to you, Senior Su. Please help me. A wise man submits to circumstances. According to Zhiqing, sect leader Fu also wants to achieve something big. There's no need to be so calculative over such a small matter. Su Hong smiled. Then, he looked at Fu Feng and asked, What about you? Do you want to make things difficult for me, or do you want to obediently swear an oath? We're willing to swear an oath. Fu Feng and Lu Yun looked at each other and smiled bitterly. What could they do? These were Foundation establishment cultivators. Even the Fu family master couldn't defeat them. Therefore, they smiled apologetically and said, We won't come to White Bamboo Mountain again, and we won't look for Tsongda and the others. And we won't let them have any ideas about the Qingyun talisman and invisibility talisman of our heavenly talisman sect. Tsongda added. Good. Fu Feng nodded and swore an oath. Not bad. These little guys are sensible. Zhong Yejing nodded. Otherwise, I would be in a difficult position. Then, can we leave now? Fu Feng and Lu Yun looked at each other bitterly. In front of 4 Foundation establishment cultivators, they were indeed little guys. This trip to the Meng Kingdom was really fruitless. However, being able to see Fu Zhu and Fu Eo alive and well, and their cultivation improved greatly, wasn't it a gain for Fu Feng? Go! Su Hong waved his hand. Go back directly. Don't make any other plans. Yes, we don't dare. Fu Feng and the others were overjoyed. They looked at Fu Zhu and the others and were about to fly away. At this time, a lazy voice sounded. What's wrong? You're leaving now? Why do I feel that it's inappropriate? Who is it? When Su Hong saw that there were more cultivators approaching, he flew into a rage out of humiliation. When he looked up, he saw a young man and a young woman gradually appear on the foothills about 100 feet away from them. Weren't they Xiaohua and Xue Xue? Xiaohua! Yun Qinglian and Yun Qingfeng's faces revealed extremely shocked expressions. It was as if they'd seen a ghost. They practically didn't dare believe that Xiaohua, who'd been killed by Yun Tingyu, would actually make an appearance here. Xiaohua! An early-stage Foundation establishment cultivator? Fu Feng and Lu Yun naturally recognized Xiaohua. Their expressions were complicated. Other than shock, there was also envy, jealousy, and uneasiness. When Xiaohua escaped from Jihua Mountain, Fu Feng was present. He didn't think that Xiaohua could escape from the hands of 4 Foundation establishment cultivators. He didn't even think that Xiaohua would appear in the distant Ming country with an early Foundation establishment cultivator. After all, Xiaohua was only at the 5th or 6th level of qi refining. Xiaohua! You actually... Song Guang found it even more inconceivable. As he made all sorts of guesses, the panic on his face turned into realization. Fu Zhu and Fu Wei covered their mouths in shock, their eyes wide open. Invisibility talisman? When Su Hong saw Xiaohua, who was also in the early stage of the foundation building realm, and Xue Xue, who was at the peak of the 12th layer of the aura refining realm, he didn't pay them any mind. He glanced at Yunqinglian, frowned, and sneered. Fellow Taoist, which sect or family are you from? Why are you sneaking around here with invisibility talismans? You talk too much. Who do you think you are? How dare you talk to this Xiao like this? Xiaohua's face revealed a layer of killing intent. He waved his Taoist robe, and a fierce force came out of it. In an instant, the spiritual energy of heaven and earth around Su Hong was confined. Ah! Su Hong was shocked. He felt as if he was completely surrounded by a layer of solid rock. He couldn't even move his limbs. Moreover, the true essence around his body was also confined. He couldn't use even a trace of magic power. He was very clear in his heart that Xiaohua's magic power was higher than his by more than a level. Not only that, Xiaohua's figure immediately flew to Su Hong's side with an inconceivable speed in the blink of an eye. Raising his hand, pa, he slapped Su Hong's face twice. When the first slap landed, Su Hong's body flashed with brilliance. It seemed that the defensive yellow talisman was broken by Xiaohua's hand. You! Zhong Yejing was shocked. She clapped her hands and a strange magic tool appeared in her hands. Humph, if it was me, I would just quietly watch. I wouldn't invite trouble to myself. Xiaohua didn't even look at her, and said coldly. Then he raised his foot again. With a bang, he kicked Su Hong to a corner of the foothill. Blood immediately flowed out from the corner of Su Hong's mouth. But contrary to everyone's expectations, Su Hong struggled to stand up. He bowed very respectfully. Junior was wrong. Please give me pointers, Senior Xiao. This Xiao isn't your senior. Xiaohua's gaze swept over Su Hong and said coldly. This Xiao doesn't want to see someone bullying the weak and forcefully snatching other people's things. Especially since this thing is what this Xiao owes others. Saying this, Xiaohua clapped his hands and took out a few jade slips from his storage pouch. He threw them to Su Hong and said, Su Hong, these are the jade slips I gave you that day. I'll return them to you now. Take good care of them and properly teach the disciples. Properly support the Heavenly Talisman sect. Don't worry. If any news is leaked out and someone with a higher cultivation than this Xiao comes to find you, this Xiao will first exterminate the Su family, Zhong family, and Misty Cloud sect. Yes, this junior understands. Su Hong was overjoyed. He received the divine accumulation talisman and the jade slips and bowed in thanks. Yes, this junior understands. Su Hong bitterly smiled and wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth. He smiled apologetically and said, This junior will definitely keep this matter a secret. If anything happens to the Heavenly Talisman sect, please send a message to this Su. If it is within my power, this Su will definitely not refuse. Haha, in the future, this Fu will definitely pay a visit to Senior Su. Su Hong was very good at currying favor. Then Xiaohua looked at Zhong Yejing. Zhong Yejing bitterly smiled and hurriedly said, This junior only wanted to exchange for a small piece of Qian Mo's secret stone from fellow Taoist Su. That's why I was invited to help. This junior swears that this junior will definitely not leak it. And Xiaohua's heart moved. He immediately nodded and no longer paid attention to Zhong Yejing. Senior Xiao. Yun Qinglian and Yun Qingfeng's expressions were complicated. Xiaohua rolled his eyes and said coldly, This Xiao and your Misty Clouds sect can be considered as having a grudge. Originally, this Xiao wanted to wait until this matter was over before going to look for Yun Tingyu. However, I just heard that your sect leader has already passed away. This Xiao is a bit puzzled. That day, Yun Tingyu was full of vitality. Why did he suddenly pass away? Isn't this because of Senior? Yun Qingfeng's eyes narrowed. However, when he thought about how Xiaohua was not at a disadvantage against the four of them, How could he have any thoughts of resistance? He then transmitted his voice and told Xiaohua what he had done. Oh, so that's how it is. Xiaohua nodded, the expression on his face softening slightly. After pondering for a moment, he said, "Since Sect Master Yun had an epiphany before his death and actually had the thought of repentance, and even urged his sect to do more good deeds, then this Xiao will let you all go. Many thanks for Senior's mercy." Yun Qinglian and Yun Qingfeng's anxious hearts finally relaxed. With their strength, they really didn't have any thoughts of resistance. It was inevitable that they still had doubts in their hearts, but would they say it out loud? "And you all?" Xiaohua turned to look at Fu Feng and Lu Yun. "Senior Xiao, if there's anything, please instruct us." Fu Feng and Lu Yun were scared witless. Even Su Hong, a Foundation establishment senior, was sent flying by Xiaohua's kick. When he stood up, he didn't even dare to be angry and humiliated. He even wanted to thank Xiaohua for not killing him. How could they have the slightest intention to rebel? And this Xiao was originally a bit embarrassed. Xiaohua nodded. "The matter between you all is an old grudge of the Fu clan. It's not about who is right and who is wrong. Everyone has their own reasons. However, since Elder Fu has already vowed not to cause any more trouble, this Xiao will have an easier time. However, Elder Fu, please go back and report to Fu Yunhua that this matter will end here. This Xiao will also not pursue the matters in Jinhua Mountain. Consider it a kind of exchange." "Yes, this junior understands." This junior will pass on Senior Zhao's words to the clan leader. Fu Feng hurriedly bowed and said, "Good." Xiaohua nodded. After Xiaohua finished speaking, Fu Feng hurriedly cupped his hands and said, "This junior thanks Senior Xiao for his kindness. Since this matter has already reached a satisfactory conclusion under Senior Zhao's guidance, this Fu is untalented. Please come to my Heavenly Talisman Sect's guest hall and let this junior play the role of a host. Hee, there's no hurry." Xiaohua waved his hand and looked at another mountain. He smiled and said, "Fellow Taoists, isn't it too late to leave now?" "Ah? There's someone else?" Su Hong, Yun Qinglian, and the others were even more shocked. Fu Feng's eyes flashed with understanding. She looked at Xiaohua and then at the place Xiaohua was pointing at. "Ha, fellow Taoist Xiao is really amazing." A very abnormal voice sounded. Then, just like Xiaohua, two cultivators slowly appeared in a certain place. They were completely enthralled. The cultivator in front cupped his hands and said, "Fellow Taoist Xiao, we're just passing by. We definitely have no other intentions. We'll leave immediately and won't delay fellow Taoist's matter." "Fellow Taoist, are you just passing by?" Xiaohua narrowed his eyes and looked at that cultivator with confidence. He said coldly, "Fellow Taoist, if you don't take down the Milu and make a hard oath, how can I let you go? Fellow Taoist Xiao, don't push us too far." That cultivator also said angrily, "Don't think that just because you have a bit of cultivation, you can be arrogant. If this old man takes down the Milu, do you still want to live?" "Ha!" Xiaohua clapped his hands. The soaring dragon shears flashed with a golden light and flew into the air. Like lightning, it slashed towards the cultivator. "This Xiao wants to see who will be able to kill who." "Humph." That cultivator clapped his hands and took out a fan-like magic treasure. Under the urging of his magic power, a hurricane was born from the fan-like magic treasure. As the cultivator waved his hand, that hurricane actually turned into dozens of sword-like wind blades and stabbed towards Xiaohua. Eh? Xiaohua felt the sharp fluctuation of spiritual power on the wind blades, and the astonishing magic power contained in the wind blades. He couldn't help but be a bit stunned. He thought, Foundation establishment late-stage cultivation? Could it be that this young master guessed correctly? This guy really isn't Xiao Minwei? If it's not him, then who is it? However, if a mere Foundation establishment late-stage cultivator wants to escape from this young master's hands, that's simply a dream. Break. Xiaohua sneered. He pointed his hand and the soaring dragon shears flashed with a golden light. Like cutting silk, it easily cut the numerous wind blades in half. The golden light didn't even lose its momentum and slashed towards the fan like magic treasure. -8. Chapter 2097. Oh, such a tyrannical magic treasure, such a strong magic power! That cultivator clearly understood Su Hong's situation and knew that he had underestimated Xiao Hua. He was slightly surprised, but he still did not panic. He opened his mouth and spat out a mouthful of life essence, sprinkling it on the palm leaf fan. The palm leaf fan shone brilliantly, and with a schwa sound, the brilliance collided with the soaring dragon scissors. The cultivator sucked in a breath of cold air, and with a wave of his hand, the palm leaf fan fell into his hand. However, there was already a faint crack on the palm leaf fan. It was actually a mark left by the soaring dragon scissors. Rise! Xiao Hua simply didn't give the Miao cultivators a chance to breathe. His hands continuously rubbed, and two Samadhi true fire walls appeared from his hands. In the blink of an eye, the two Miao cultivators were surrounded. Ah! Samadhi true fire! The cultivator was stunned. His voice was concealed by the palm leaf fan, but it still revealed his panic. Fellow Taoists, do you really want me to kill you? Xiao Hua's tone was cold, and it seemed to penetrate the cultivator's heart. Along with this voice, Xiao Hua once again clapped his hands, and a rumbling sound like millions of bees was heard. It was also like a huge hill slowly rising. Xiao Hua actually took out the second magic treasure, the cloud-suppressing seal. Above the cloud-suppressing seal, a bronze brilliance bloomed, and the surrounding spiritual energy quickly condensed, faintly forming a veil. Ah! Su Hong and the others were once again shocked in their hearts. Xiao Hua really opened their eyes again and again. As long as it was a cultivator, even if it was a Jingdan stage senior, being able to use one magic treasure and one magic tool at a time was already rare and commendable. Xiao Hua actually took out two magic tools at once. It seemed that each magic treasure was more powerful than the previous one. Is this still the poor rogue cultivator from that year? Not only did the people who knew Xiao Hua the earliest have such thoughts, but even Fu Feng, Lu Yun, and the others also had such thoughts. In just a few decades, Xiao Hua was actually so powerful, so fierce. On the other hand, they themselves did not seem to have changed. In an instant, Fu Feng recalled in her heart. Fortunately, she didn't seem to have done anything to offend Xiao Hua. Looking at the Miho cultivator again, seeing Xiao Hua use the cloud-suppressing seal, the face of the Miho cultivator was a little pale, but at the same time, a kind of arrogance was aroused in his eyes. The cultivator stretched out his hand and patted on his own head. Woo! The roar of a beast was like an earthquake, and a faint shadow of a black bear about 5 feet tall flashed out from his back. It was actually the black bear Dharma body. As soon as the black bear Dharma body appeared, a fierce aura was released, as if the pressure of a foundation establishment late-stage cultivator directly rushed towards Xiao Hua. Fellow Taoist, if you want to die, release this avatar. Xiao Hua did not panic at all. He also did not release his pressure. Before the aura of the black bear celestial body could suppress him, a cold light flashed in his eyes. He seemed to be mumbling something. Ah! The Miho cultivator suddenly clutched his head and curled up as if someone had struck him hard in the head. He quickly withdrew the avatar he had just released, and his fierce aura was withdrawn as well. Fellow Taoist Xiao, please spare my life. I will get rid of this Miho. The Miho cultivator's voice was hoarse. He hurriedly waved his hand and begged for mercy, removing the Miho from his body. Ah? It's actually Chiu Mingwei? Xiao Hua widened his eyes and looked at this fat cultivator. Chiu Mingwei's black and fat body was definitely comparable to Su Hong's. Xiao Hua was more curious about the other Miho cultivator. However, when Liao Xianlan took the Miho cultivator, Xiao Hua's eyes fell even more. It really is the Foundation Establishment early stage Liao Xianlan. This is somewhat inconceivable. Xiao Hua almost murmured. How did Liao Xianlan reach Foundation Establishment? Her previous cultivation. Chiu Mingwei, Liao Xianlan. Yunde, Fu Feng, and the others almost moaned as if this was not White Bamboo Mountain, but Golden Mount Hua. Several people of the Fu clan's grievances were actually gathered in the distant Meng country. Junior, greets Senior Xiao! Liao Xuanlan's face was somewhat pale and somewhat unwilling. She hesitated for a moment, then stepped forward and bowed. And Xiao Hua flicked his sleeve. You and I are old acquaintances, don't be too polite. Greetings, fellow Taoist Xiao. Chiu Mingwei put away all the magic treasures, and Xiao Hua also put away the Samadhi true fire. He stepped forward and greeted. I really didn't expect that an unknown Qi refinement disciple from back then would have a cultivation far surpassing me. Yes, Golden Mount Hua Xiao Hua was simply an ant in Chiu Mingwei's eyes. He even joined hands with Fu Yunbui to help the 3 cultivation sects surround Xiao Hua, but now Xiao Hua killed him without any effort at all. Especially Xiao Hua's soul stab at the end. Without anyone noticing, it suddenly poked his weak spot. He no longer dared to have any thoughts of resistance in his heart. He believed that if he really released his Dharma body, Xiao Hua would definitely use an unimaginable method to kill him. Humph, you're just a little cultivator who was chased by others until you pissed your pants, Xiao Hua said coldly. Hee, that day I felt that the 3 cultivation sects were too much of a bully, actually sending 4 foundation establishment cultivators. Chiu Mingwei smiled apologetically. However, since fellow Taoist Xiao is so talented, even if they send 10 more, I'm afraid it still won't work. Although Chiu Mingwei had some flattery in his words, he was speaking from the bottom of his heart. He really couldn't believe that Xiao Hua actually had a cultivation comparable to a golden core cultivator in just a few decades. How could he endure this? Especially when he used a special method to forcibly enter the late stage of foundation establishment. So it's Senior Liao who came. Songde didn't miss the opportunity to bow and say, presumably Senior Liao still has some misunderstandings towards me. Since Senior Xiao is here, this junior will clearly explain the cause of this matter. Let Senior Xiao uphold justice for us. Uphold justice for what? Liao Xuanlan's heart was bitter as she thought to herself. Xiao Hua said it clearly just now that he supports the Heavenly Talisman sect. With the support of this golden core cultivator, how many cultivators on the Dawn Rain continent will disturb the Heavenly Talisman sect? Without waiting for Liao Xianlan to speak, Songde raised his hand and said, This isn't the place to talk. This junior invites seniors to sit in the guest hall. Senior Xiao, we won't stay any longer. Senior already knows why we came. Moreover, there's still a drought around Yu City. It's better for us to go back and help. Yun Qilai and Yun Qifeng bowed and said. Xiao Hua thought for a moment and nodded. That's good. This Xiao will remember what you did. If anything happens to the Misty Cloud sect, this Xiao will definitely help. Yun Qilai and Yun Qifeng were overjoyed and bowed to express their thanks. Oh right, there's also some good seeds that this Xiao collected. Take them. If you see a place where the rice can't germinate, give these good seeds to them to cultivate. Remember. Xiao Hua took out a small storage pouch from his bosom and handed it over. -8. Chapter 2098. Yes, this junior understands. Senior Zhao's compassion truly makes this junior admire you. Yun Qifeng took the storage pouch and left. As for how they would report to Misty Cloud's sect master when they return, that was not Xiao Hua's concern. Junior and the others will not stay any longer. Su Hong and Zhong Yejing also bowed and said. Unexpectedly, Xiao Hua waved his hand and said, Fellow Taoist Su, please wait a moment. I heard from fellow Taoist Zhong that you have a small piece of Qian Mo's secret stone? Su Hong nodded and clapped his hand, taking out a fingernail-sized Qian Mo's secret stone and handed it over. He smiled apologetically and said, This junior only has this small piece. If senior needs it, please take it. Zhong Yejing at the side was speechless. She was careful, said endless good words, and even accompanied Su Hong to help out, just to exchange this Qian Mo's secret stone with him. But Xiao Hua's one sentence, and Su Hong immediately gave it to him. This made her feel very uncomfortable. Xiao Hua took it and clapped his hand again, taking out many spirit stones and handing them to Su Hong. He smiled and said, "How can I take fellow Taoists' things for free? Are these spirit stones enough?" Su Hong's divine sense swept over, his face already showing joy. Nowadays, spirit stones in Dawn Rain continent were gradually becoming scarce. Xiao Hua's spirit stones were more than enough. Su Hong took the spirit stones, cupped his hands and flew up. At this time, Xiao Hua spoke again. "Fellow Taoist Zhong, please wait a moment. This Xiao has something to ask." "Senior Xiao, please speak." Zhong Yejing was a bit surprised. She definitely had nothing to do with today's matter. She really could not think of what Xiao Hua wanted to ask her. But after Xiao Hua transmitted a few words, Zhong Yejing's face showed a serious expression, then a burst of ecstasy, nodding vigorously. "And since that's the case, fellow Taoist Zhong, please stay. This Xiao will discuss this matter with fellow Taoist Zhong later," Xiao Hua said without any doubt. "Yes, Junior understands." Zhong Yejing smiled and said to Su Hong, "Fellow Taoist Su, please go first." "Okay," Su Hong nodded, not daring to ask anything, and flew away. "Let's go. We will go to the guest hall to see the recent situation of Heavenly Talisman sect." Xiao Hua smiled and said, "Please lead the way." "Yes, Senior Xiao, Senior Chiu, this way please." His face was full of joy. The grudges between Chiu Mingwei and the Fu family of Jinhua had come to an end today. With the support of his old friend Xiao Hua, it was impossible for his Heavenly Talisman school not to prosper. The Heavenly Talisman sect's guest hall was actually very simple and crude. It was a hall that was made after the cave was tidied up. However, Xiao Hua didn't mind at all. He looked around with interest, then smiled again. "Sect Master Fu, your welcoming hall isn't small, but there aren't enough chairs inside. You're not qualified to be a sect master." "Hee, Senior Xiao is right." With a big smile on his face, Songning called out to Fu Zhu and Fu Puppet to prepare tea and other things. He said, "Junior Heavenly Talisman sect is just a cover. Junior Heavenly Talisman sect is only a small success in Qi refining. Everyone else is at the 11th layer of Qi refining. The only disciples we have are either children or low-level cultivators with poor aptitudes. This junior had never thought that so many seniors would return at once. Today's grand occasion is something that this junior has dreamt of even in his dreams. This junior has prepared for 50 years before it can appear. Senior Zhao's arrival has made this junior's dream come true. This junior is truly grateful." Xiao Hua waved his hand and said, "You don't need to trouble yourself. We'll just sit on the floor." "It's no trouble, no trouble," Songning said anxiously. Fu Feng looked at Lu Yun and also said anxiously, "There's no need, Senior Xiao. We'll send the Fu clan's disciples out to have a good chat with the Heavenly Talisman sect's disciples. We'll just talk. And this junior will also go out." Lu Yun smiled and waved her hand. Fu Shan and the other disciples followed her out of the welcoming hall. "Senior Xiao, please take a seat." Songning arranged the seats and respectfully invited Xiao Hua to take a seat. Xiao Hua looked around. Songning actually only placed one jade chair in the center. The other chairs were placed on both sides of the chair. The flattery in his eyes was self-evident. And Xiao Hua nodded and said to Chiu Mingwei with a smile, "It would be impolite of me to refuse." "Of course. Fellow Taoist Xiao, please." Chiu Mingwei's face was a bit embarrassed. He was at the late stage of foundation establishment, and his cultivation was the highest among them. Xiao Hua was only at the early stage of foundation establishment. However, Chiu Mingwei still understood that Xiao Hua's appearance was somewhat discounted. Xiao Hua took a seat first. Chiu Mingwei, Liao Xianlan, Zhong Yejing, and Fu Feng took the guest seats. Songning, Fu Zhu, and Fu Ai sat on the left side of the main seat. Shui was very curious and kept staring at Fu Zhu and Fu Ai. Xiao Hua drank a mouthful of spirit tea and said with a smile, "I'm quite familiar with the grudges between the two generations of the Fu clan. I was also involved in it a few decades ago. Elder Fu has already made a hard oath and explained it on behalf of Fu Yunhua. I won't say anything more. I only want to say one thing. It's up to you whether you want to listen or not. Senior Xiao, please enlighten us. Song Ying and Fu Feng hurriedly stood up and bowed. Both sides are from the Fu clan. No matter if it's Xi or Meng, the bloodline is the same, Xiaohua said after pondering for a while. If both sides fight, both sides will suffer. Actually, it's not that you haven't thought about it, but because of the hatred in your heart, you feel that the other side won't forgive you. That's why you're in a stalemate. Just now, this Xiao clearly saw that Elder Fu is very fond of Fu Zhu and Fu Ma. In the future, the direct disciples of Talisman Gate will also be the children of these two people. Elder Fu may not necessarily not cherish them. Therefore, this Xiao hopes that your two families will take a few steps back and consider this matter carefully. Song Ying glanced at Fu Feng and didn't say anything. After all, he was the weaker side. Junior will definitely pass on your words to the clan head, Fu Feng said with a smile. Junior is only an elder after all. I can't promise Senior anything. And this is just a small thought of mine. Xiaohua waved his hand. Then, he looked at Liao Xianlan and said, Fellow Taoist Liao, I'm also clear about your grudges. It seems to be in the Fu clan of Jinhua Mountain, right? Yes. Liao Xianlan bit her lips and replied like a mosquito. Hee, I don't dare to talk about who is right and who is wrong. I'm sure fellow Taoist Xiao won't not talk about it with you. Xiaohua nodded and said, I just think that since you want to take revenge, you should clearly distinguish between gratitude and grudges. Don't drag unrelated people into this. Moreover, I won't hide it from you fellow Taoists. What I hate the most is using grudges as a cover to do things that harm others for their own benefit. It's against reason and nature. Liao Xuanman's face flushed red. She lowered her head deeply and didn't dare to say a word. Fellow Taoist Liao, you and I can be considered old friends. On Jinhua Mountain, we also look after each other. I won't say anything more today, and I don't want to pursue this matter anymore. Fellow Taoist is also a foundation establishment cultivator. The road to heaven is in front of fellow Taoist. I hope fellow Taoist Liao can take care of yourself. Xiaohua said with a gloomy and cold tone. Yes, Junior understands. For some reason, Liao Xuanman's face turned pale. She murmured, even if Junior wants to improve her cultivation in the future, it will be extremely difficult. That's why Junior has evil thoughts. I want to obtain Fu Clan Head's yellow talisman technique. Oh? Xiaohua stared blankly. He glanced at Liao Xianlan and then looked at Qiu Mingwei. Cough cough. Qiu Mingwei's face showed a trace of embarrassment. He knew Xiaohua was going to ask, so he didn't hide it and told him the reason. It turned out that Qiu Mingwei had obtained a secret technique in his early years. It was the widely rumored human cauldron furnace technique of plucking yin to replenish yang. This human cauldron furnace technique was the same as dual cultivation. They both relied on the balance of yin and yang to achieve a breakthrough in cultivation. However, dual cultivation was based on the balance of yin and yang. It was beneficial for both men and women. However, the human cauldron furnace technique was different. The male cultivator was the main cultivator and the female cultivator was the auxiliary cultivator. The female cultivator could certainly benefit, but there were more injuries. Liao Xianlan was in such a situation. That day, Qiu Mingwei met Liao Xianlan and saw that her constitution was different. It was actually compatible with his human cauldron furnace technique. He wanted to make Liao Xianlan his human cauldron. However, the human cauldron furnace technique was also voluntary. Therefore, Liao Xianlan set revenge as her condition. Of course, Qiu Mingwei would not blindly compromise. He only agreed to help her once. After all, he had to deal with a cultivator family. But that day, Liao Xuanlan's revenge was blocked by Xiaohua. Qiu Mingwei saw that Jinhua Mountain was involved in the grievances of the three sects, so he did not dare to force Fu Yunhua too much. He only brought Liao Xianlan out from Jinhua Mountain. When Qiu Mingwei failed to break through to Foundation Establishment late stage, he had no choice but to copulate with Liao Xianlan. Using Liao Xianlan as his human cauldron, he forcibly broke through to Foundation Establishment late stage. Liao Xianlan also benefited from this and directly entered Foundation Establishment early stage. However, the consequence of this kind of forcible advancement was that Liao Xuanlan's cultivation could only remain at Foundation Establishment early stage for the rest of her life. Oh, so that's how it is! Xiaohua suddenly understood. He secretly said. No wonder Liao Xianlan suddenly entered Foundation Establishment. This young master used this to guess these two people. It was impossible to guess correctly. Fellow Xiao, this is my secret technique. I ask fellow Xiao to accept it. Consider it a small token of my appreciation, Qiu Mingwei said. He stretched out his hand and took out a jade slip and handed it to Xiaohua. Ah? Xiaohua stared blankly. He didn't have such thoughts. Knowing that Qiu Mingwei had misunderstood, he unconsciously turned his head to look at Xue Xue. Xue Xue was currently looking down, and didn't even look at him. Many thanks, fellow Taoist Qiu. Xiaohua's eyes turned slightly, and he reached out to receive it. Qiu Mingwei was delighted in his heart when he saw Xiaohua receive the jade slip, and he stood up and said, Since the enmity between my wife and sect Master Fu has been exposed, then I won't stay here any longer. Farewell. All right then. Xiaohua stood up and returned the greeting. He casually said, Actually, there's no harm in trying out Gung Mountain's Liao clan's pill refining technique. Even Head Fu was able to establish the Heavenly Talisman sect. Since fellow Taoist Liao has fellow Taoist Qiu's support, what's there to fear? Liao Xuanlan's face lit up with joy. She bowed toward Xiaohua and said, Senior Zhao's shout was like being enlightened. This junior was blindly thinking of inheriting Gung Mountain's Liao family's talisman crafting technique, and neglected my husband's help. In the future, this junior will try to refine pills. If I succeed, I still have to thank Senior for his kindness today. -8. Chapter 2099. Haha, no problem, no problem. Xiaohua laughed casually. He was just interested in the Liao family's alchemy technique, but he didn't know if it was complete or not. After Qiu Mingwei and Liao Xianlan left, only Zhong Yejing, an outsider, was left. The others were familiar with each other in Jinhua Mountain. Xiaohua smiled and said, Fellow Taoist Zhong, please wait outside for a while. I have something to discuss with Master Fu and the others. I will go with you to the Zhong family immediately. Yes, I understand. Zhong Yejing replied with a smile before walking out of the room. Seeing that there were no outsiders in the guest hall, Xiaohua asked his last doubt. Master Fu, I still have some doubts. Do I have to ask? Senior Xiao, what sect Master Fu? You can just call me Fu. Songda smiled and said, My Heavenly Talisman sect's talisman technique and cultivation method are all from Senior Xiao. Why are you so polite? Haha, Xiaohua shook his head. Those are all Master Fu's own. They have nothing to do with me. I have some doubts. Didn't Fu Yunhua say that Master Fu, Fu Zhu, and Fu Ho? Oh, so that's it. With a sudden realization, he looked at his two twin wives with a very sweet look in his eyes. He then transmitted a few words to Xiaohua. Xiaohua's face showed a look of realization. He nodded and said with a smile, Since you're not directly related by blood, that's the best. This Zhao's wives have been thinking about this all the way, and have often sighed for you. So the confused cultivator in the Black Forest is Senior Xiao? Fu Feng had been suspicious and asked hurriedly. Haha, yes. Xiaohua smiled and said, I met Songde in Shi country and heard that he came to Meng country. Since Elder Fu also came, I naturally came too. I know how bad it is to owe someone something. That's because Senior Xiao has a noble character. If it was someone else, he would have taken it himself. Songde smiled apologetically. Well, Elder Fu, since the grudge has been revealed, the disciples of Jinhua Mountain will stay in White Bamboo Mountain for a few more days. Xiaohua smiled and said, Now I have a few words to say to Master Fu. Yes, I'll go out now, Fu Feng said with a smile. I also hope that the Fu clan can flourish and prosper. After everyone had left, Xiao Hua's expression turned serious as he said, That's right. Listen carefully. The reason why I supported you earlier was to help you eliminate the enemies in front of you. It can be considered as giving your heavenly talisman sect a buffer. This Xiao has never thought of blocking your heavenly talisman sect. Although Songqing was depressed in his heart, he didn't show it on his face. He cupped his hands and said, Junior understands Senior's painstaking efforts. For Senior to take care of Junior like this, Junior is already endlessly grateful. Yes, after all, you and I are fated to meet. Xiao Hua nodded. Sect Master Fu has used this Zhao's name to fend off strong enemies in the beginning. However, if Sect Master Fu does anything shameless, this Xiao will definitely not show mercy. Thank you, Senior. An overjoyed expression appeared on Songda's face as he said, Actually, if Senior Xiao is willing, this Junior's heavenly talisman sect can let Senior become the sect master. Ha ha ha, there's no need. Xiao Hua flicked his sleeves. Why would he care about a small sect like this? Then, he waved his hand and took out a storage pouch. He handed it to Songda and said, This Xiao didn't know that Sect Master Fu had established a sect, so I don't have any gifts. Just take this as a token of my sincerity. Hee, there's no need. Songda politely declined, but he still took the pouch. However, when he opened the storage pouch, he couldn't help but be stunned. He muttered, Foundation establishment pills, spirit stones, spirit herbs, and some rice? Songda raised his head. His eyes were filled with sincerity as he said, Senior Xiao, this Junior won't speak empty words. These things are too precious to Junior and the Heavenly Talisman sect. Moreover, they are too important. This Junior didn't expect Senior to give Junior so many things. This Junior really can't express the excitement in my heart right now. Forget it. Since you don't speak empty words, this Xiao won't speak any empty words either. Xiao Hua patted Songda's shoulder and said, You and I are old acquaintances. In the past, you also took care of this Xiao. Since this Xiao can help you, why wouldn't I? This Xiao also knows that you have great talent and great ambitions. You want to achieve great things on Xiaoyu continent. Today, I've said many times that everything you do must be worthy of your conscience. Yes, this Junior will definitely remember. Songda said, This Junior will personally take the seeds in this storage pouch with my wife. This Junior will definitely complete Senior's task properly. Good. This Xiao will take his leave now. Xiao Hua stared at Songda. He didn't know what to think. I hope you can keep your words. Senior, you're leaving now? Songda said anxiously. You won't stay for a few more days? This Junior still wants to listen to Senior's teachings. Xiao Hua understood Songda's thoughts. He muttered to himself for a moment and said, Songda, it's not that this Xiao doesn't want to help you build your foundation. You also saw that my wife is also at the peak of the 12th layer of qi refining. She also hasn't built her foundation. However, building one's foundation is a fated chance. Everyone is different, so there's nothing special to learn from. And this Zhao's foundation building is also different from others, so there's nothing I can teach you. Songda's face was filled with disappointment, but he still had a smile on his face. This Junior is already happy that Senior Xiao can think of this. As he said this, Songda clapped his hands and took out a worn-out silk cloth. He handed it over to Xiao Hua and said, Senior Xiao has done so much for this Junior. This Junior really has nothing to repay. This Junior also guessed that although Senior's cultivation base is already at the core formation realm, this Junior and the others can still sense that Senior's cultivation base is at the foundation establishment realm. I'm afraid this is the reason for this Junior's so-called crossing the sea of deception cultivation technique. This is a record of the cultivation technique. It belongs to the senior who raised this Junior. Uncle Xiang. This is the senior's legacy. This Junior treasures this item very much. However, if this Junior doesn't give this item to Senior, this junior will feel apologetic. Oh? Is that so? Xiao Hua knew that there were some flaws in this crossing the sea of deception, so he already had the idea to make up for it. After receiving the item, he carefully looked at it and nodded. I know your intentions. I'll just make a copy of this cultivation technique. I'll leave this item to you. If it's the complete cultivation technique, Senior Xiao can just make a copy. This junior will definitely keep this item. Songde waved his hand and said, but this silk cloth is damaged. If there's something wrong with the copy, I'm afraid it'll be detrimental to Senior's cultivation. Senior should just keep it. Hearing this, Xiao Hua looked at Songde's sincere expression and made a decision in his heart. He nodded and said, since it's like this Xiao will accept it. Then, Xiao Hua put away the silk cloth and walked out of the guest hall. He saw Xue Xue whispering to Fu Zhu and Fu Puppet. They seemed to be very close. Xue Xue heard Xiao Hua coming out and hurriedly went over to greet him. Let's go, Xiao Hua said with a smile. Everything has been explained. The Heavenly Talisman sect in Jihua Mountain's Fu clan can be considered to have a good start. In the future, everything will be under Fu clan's control. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Qidian. Come to vote for it. -8. Chapter 2100. Yunde and Fu Feng tried their best to urge him to stay, but Xiao Hua only smiled and didn't stop. Now that he had the status of a senior, everyone was respectful in front of him. He was far from being free and unfettered when he was with Xue Xue, so Xiao Hua didn't want to stay here any longer. Zhong Yejing naturally cupped her hands and bid farewell to Yunde and the others. To be honest, she wasn't interested in the Heavenly Talisman sect at all. This kind of cultivation sect that couldn't even be compared to an ordinary cultivation family, or a small sect that was created to satisfy the selfish desires of a sect master. There were many of them in Ming country. She didn't dare to say that she had seen 100 of them, but there were at least dozens of them. These sects were like morning dew, but they would disappear under the sun. Zhong Yejing didn't understand why Xiao Hua said those words for the sake of the Heavenly Talisman sect's survival. After all, on the dawn-rained continent, cultivators were as numerous as the hares on an ox, and the karma between them was even more chaotic. Xiao Hua would pay too much for what he said today. However, after waiting for more than half a day, under Zhong Yejing's lead, the three of them didn't fly too far. However, Xiao Hua's actions made Zhong Yejing realize something. Xiao Hua didn't fly by himself, but released his divine sense. Every time he flew for a while, he would stop and let Zhong Yejing and Xue Xue wait while he flew away. Sometimes he was far away, and Zhong Yejing's divine sense couldn't reach him. Sometimes he was close, and Zhong Yejing could see clearly with her divine sense. Xiao Hua sat there and actually did what he instructed Yunde to do, and gave some good seeds to the villagers who were farming. Is this still a cultivator? Zhong Yejing was enlightened, but she still couldn't understand. Since she was young, she knew that she was a cultivation disciple and had never heard of secular people. When she met these secular people during her travels, she was also instilled with the concept of ants by her clansmen. Therefore, not only did she not know that secular people had to rely on farming to make a living, she also didn't know that secular people needed to rely on mulberry and cotton to keep warm. There was no need to even mention the fact that the rice was extinct and the fine variety was extinct. Senior Xiao, this method of yours, can it increase cultivation? Zhong Yejing seemed to have caught on to something. She waited until Xiao Hua came back in a hurry and asked, could it be that you have such a high cultivation, but you relied on this to benefit from it? Ha ha ha, Xiao Hua laughed heartily. He glanced at Xue Xue and said, if this can increase one's cultivation, then why would cultivators go back to cultivate? Do these secular people still need to farm? Then, why is Senior doing such a useless thing? Zhong Yejing finally voiced out her doubts. The first thing that the head of the Zhong family told us after we became sensible was to improve our cultivation by any means necessary. As long as you have a superhuman cultivation, all your means will be legitimate. Xiaohua actually didn't want to explain too much to her. There were some things that if other people understood, they would understand even if you didn't say a word. But if there were some things that other people didn't understand, they wouldn't understand even if you were eloquent. After thinking for a moment, Xiaohua stretched out his right hand and patted his chest. He said with a smile, "Nothing else but my conscience." Conscience? Zhong Yejing was even more puzzled. She secretly said, "Conscience, this thing, how many spirit stones is it worth?" Senior's wisdom really benefits this junior. Zhong Yejing didn't refute Xiaohua. She smiled apologetically and said, "Just now Senior said that you know Zhong Xiuhan and Zhong Haoran from my Zhong family. What's going on? This junior hasn't seen them for a long time." Xiaohua was not in a hurry to answer. Instead, he asked, "The 2 gold leaves that fellow Zhong mentioned, are they still in the Zhong family?" "They should be." Zhong Yejing nodded and said, "This thing was taken out by Junior's third uncle, Zhong Peiyuan, several times. First, he wanted to find out where this thing came from. Second, he wanted to use this thing to exchange for the Qianmo's secret stone, but he failed several times. So, third uncle threw this thing in the ancestral hall and never took it again. If this junior remembers correctly, no one took it away." "And very good." Xiaohua nodded. "This Xiao met your third uncle at the auction in Weeping Moon City. However, this Xiao didn't know that fellow Taoist was Zhong Peiyuan. I didn't even know that he was a disciple of Meng Country's Zhong family. And Zhong Xiuhan and Zhong Haoran were also met by this Xiao when this Xiao went to the netherworld to gain experience. If fellow Zhong didn't mention the Qianmo's secret stone just now, this Xiao wouldn't have thought about asking fellow Taoist about the gold leaf. And this Xiao didn't expect that the gold leaf that this Xiao had been looking for a long time was actually in Zhong Xiuhan and Zhong Haoran's home. Yeah, the matters of the world change unpredictably. How could it be something that we cultivators can rashly guess?" Zhong Yejing sighed and said, "I didn't expect that I would meet Senior Xiao when I just wanted to exchange for a small piece of Qianmo's secret stone from Su Hong. Not only do you have the Qianmo's secret stone, but you also have several other materials for refining weapons. Senior Xiao even knows how to refine weapons. Fellow Taoist Zhong, how long will it take from here to Yinqing?" Xiaohua looked into the distance and smiled. "Not too close, about 10 days of travel." Zhong Yejing said carefully. "Okay, I don't need to be too anxious," Xiaohua said, but without waiting for him to finish, he immediately smiled and said, Wait a moment, this Xiao will go again." Shue's eyes were filled with love, and she looked at Xiaohua hurriedly flying away with satisfaction. Zhong Yejing stood at the side, and her eyes were full of helplessness. Just like this, the 3 of them didn't fly fast. On the evening of the 3rd day, Shue and Xiaohua were quietly cultivating. Xiaohua said in a low voice, "Wife, this husband has some matters to attend to, and will be back at dawn. Husband, please go, this concubine will cultivate by herself." Shue didn't ask what Xiaohua had to do, and smiled very virtuously. "Okay." Xiaohua laid down the rabbit formation, then used the earth escape technique to leave. Before the sun had even risen, he quietly returned and once again took out the concealment technique that was given to him, carefully studying and comprehending it. Shue didn't find it strange, but the Heavenly Talisman sect of White Bamboo Mountain was in chaos. Originally, after Xiaohua and the others left, Song, Fu Feng and the others became more and more harmonious. Fu Feng even taught Song how to make talismans, and Lu Yun also taught Fu Zhu and Fu Ba how to cultivate. It seemed that the disciples of Golden Mount Hua were going to stay in the Heavenly Talisman sect for a while. However, on the night of the 3rd day after Xiaohua left, a short foundation establishment middle-stage cultivator suddenly broke into White Bamboo Mountain. Not only did he want to take Song's life, he also wanted to capture Fu Zhu and Fu Ba as concubines. Naturally, Song, Fu Feng and Lu Yun resisted with all their strength, and planned to perish together. That short cultivator's methods were very powerful, and with just a few ordinary techniques, the 3 of them were forced to a dead end. Just when the 3 of them were in despair, that cultivator gave up on the technique, and took out a strange, pitch-black stick, wanting to beat the three of them to death. Strangely, when the three of them disregarded life and death and prepared to make a final resistance, the three of them discovered that their true chi, which had not changed for several years, or even several decades, suddenly showed signs of condensing, and the three of them simultaneously showed signs of building their foundation. The mood of the three of them could be imagined, both happy and sad, and half happy and half sad. What was even more strange was that at this time, that cultivator seemed to have realized something, and said, "Damn it, I made a mistake, I made a mistake." Immediately after, he threw down a few spiritual herbs and flew away. For the three of them, this was a great joy. The three of them did not have time to figure out that person's purpose, and each of them left White Bamboo Mountain to find a place to build their foundation, and quietly build their foundation. Not to mention the pleasant surprise of the others, Xiaohua's journey, which was supposed to take 10 days, took a full 15 days because of his delay. On this day, he saw a large city in front of him. There was a bustling crowd, towering city walls, and guards in bright armor. Xiaohua knew that this was Yun's city. "Sure enough," Zhong Yejing said with a smile. "Senior Xiao, this is Cloud City, the foundation of my Zhong family. More than half of the industries in this city belong to my Zhong family. More than half of the people in this city belong to my Zhong family." "Oh, are they all surnamed Zhong?" Xiaohua asked curiously. "I've been to Yu City before, but I didn't know much about it." "Senior, please understand that I said belong to, not are." Zhong Yejing smiled apologetically. "Most of the people in Cloud City are secular people, tenants, workers, or other identities of the big families surnamed Zhong in the city. These big families surnamed Zhong are the disciples of my Zhong family who have shallow aptitudes and can't cultivate, and they manage these secular industries. There are no cultivation families in Yu City, so there aren't many secular people. All the families and sects have disciples there." "Oh, I understand." Xiaohua suddenly understood. "Then the Zhong family must not be in Cloud City, right?" "Yes, I'll send a message now, asking the family head to come and welcome me." Zhong Yejing said respectfully. "All the disciples of my Zhong family are in Zhongling Mountain Village, south of Cloud City." With that, Zhong Yejing sent out a red messaging charm and asked again, "Senior Xiao, do you want to wait in Cloud City? Once the family head receives the message, he will come and welcome you personally." "Hee, no need." Xiaohua waved his hand and said, "I'm not that arrogant, let's hurry. Don't make the Zhong family head too tired." "Yes, I'll listen to Senior's instructions." Zhong Yejing had observed Xiaohua for the past 10 days and knew that he didn't have a strange temper. He was even very approachable, and his attitude was far from being proportional to his strength. However, after flying for a long time, not only did Zhong Yejing not see the family head coming to welcome her, but she also didn't receive a messaging charm. Her face became a little ugly. "Senior Xiao, I'm afraid that the family head can't come out to welcome me because of some family matters. Please forgive me," Zhong Yejing said carefully. "Well said, well said." Xiaohua waved his sleeves casually. "Your Zhong family has a lot of mundane affairs. Your family head must be very busy every day, and can't be compared to me. Even if he doesn't come out to welcome me, it's normal." Zhong Yejing smiled apologetically, but she was muttering in her heart. Although she didn't clearly explain what happened in the messaging charm, she did tell him that Xiaohua's strength was outstanding, and that even a foundation establishment late-stage cultivator had to admit defeat. Finally, she especially said that Xiaohua had the Qianmo's secret stone in his hands, and asked the family head to come and welcome him. There was a patch of green grass, a small pond that rippled in the wind, and countless tall and sturdy trees that stood upright like guards. A villa with green bricks, green tiles, green grass, and white walls appeared in the midst of the green leaves that were like waves of the sea. Xiaohua knew that this must be the Zhong family's Zhongling Mountain Village. -8. Chapter 2101. Because of politeness, Xiaohua didn't release his divine sense. He just looked from afar with a thoughtful expression. Senior! Zhong Yejing was too embarrassed to say anything. Junior will send another summoning talisman, no need. Xiaohua looked at Shui Shui and smiled. You really don't need to trouble yourself. The corner of Zhong Yejing's mouth twitched a few times. She smiled apologetically and said, Oh, okay. At this moment, a divine sense quickly swept over from the villa. When it passed by Xiaohua and the others, it swept over Xiaohua several times. However, Xiaohua's expression was the same as usual, as if he didn't notice it at all. Second uncle? Zhong Yejing's expression changed slightly. She looked at Xiaohua uneasily and whispered, Senior Xiao, this is Junior's second uncle, Zhong Peifu. Junior doesn't know why Master didn't come. Xiaohua was the same as before. He really was the same. He was far from what Zhong Yejing was worried about. A tall old cultivator flew over from the green leaves. He looked a little annoyed and impatient. He flew very fast. There seemed to be a few aura-refining disciples following behind him. They had already been left far behind. Second uncle. Zhong Yejing saw that Zhong Peifu's expression wasn't right. She hurriedly flew over and bowed respectfully. Is there something urgent in the family? Why didn't Master come out? Humph! Zhong Peifu waved his hand and scolded. What does a little girl like you know? Do you think that Master has to personally welcome any cultivator who comes to visit our Zhong family? Second uncle. Zhong Yejing felt extremely wrong, but she didn't dare to say anything. She could only smile apologetically and say, This is Xiaohua, Senior Xiao. Jing'er already said clearly on the summoning talisman that Misty Cloud sects Yunqi Lai and Yunqi Feng, as well as Su family Su Hong, suffered in front of Senior Xiao. Moreover, Jing'er personally saw a late Foundation establishment cultivator begging for mercy in front of Senior Xiao. Humph! Zhong Peifu waved his hand and coldly glanced at Xiaohua. He said, This old man will naturally judge. As he spoke, Zhong Peifu patted his forehead and released the pressure of a late Foundation establishment cultivator. Second uncle, what are you doing? Zhong Yejing was greatly shocked. She didn't expect that Zhong Peifu would actually release his pressure as soon as he came up. This was simply provoking Xiaohua. But to Zhong Yejing's and Zhong Peifu's surprise, Xiaohua didn't release any pressure at all, allowing Zhong Peifu to firmly suppress him. What? This cultivator didn't resist at all? Isn't this putting your life in the hands of others? Zhong Peifu didn't understand and felt even more uneasy. He looked at Xiaohua's calm gaze as if he was nothing. If I wanted to take his life now, it would be as easy as lifting a finger. Zhong Peifu said hesitantly. But I have no enmity with him, and he was invited by little Jing. How can I do it? Zhong Peifu was in a bit of a dilemma. His original intention was to probe Xiaohua's cultivation level. He had also stopped Zhong Yejing's transmission. He knew that Xiaohua's cultivation level was only at the early stage of the Foundation establishment realm. However, pressure couldn't be faked. As soon as Xiaohua released his pressure, he would immediately know. But he didn't expect that Xiaohua would ignore him. At this time, if Zhong Peifu withdrew his pressure, it would be tantamount to slapping his own face. Compared to Xiaohua directly getting angry, or just defeating him, he would lose face. Xiaohua's move was really sharp, like a needle hidden in silk floss. Don't tell me. I have to make a move. Zhong Peifu's eyes flashed with a trace of fierceness. Xiaohua clearly saw Zhong Peifu's fierceness. He knew that he couldn't tease this late-stage Foundation establishment realm old man anymore. Thus, Xiaohua said indifferently, Fellow Taoist Zhong, since you're probing, then stop before going too far. Don't do anything that would cause you to pull chestnuts out of the fire. Xiaohua! Imperial Thunder Sex Xiaohua? At this time, a voice sounded. Second granduncle, this is Xiaohua, fellow Taoist Xiaohua, whom I met when I was traveling in the country of Xi. He is a good person. He gave me medicinal pills. Please show mercy. Xiaohua smiled. Wasn't this the voice of the honest Zhong Haoren who was suppressed by Zhong Xiuhan? Imperial Thunder Sect's disciple? Zhong Peifu was shocked. Previously, when he heard Xiaohua's warning, he was hesitant to withdraw his pressure. Now, with Zhong Haoren's mediation, he immediately withdrew it. He even cupped his hands and said, "So it's a disciple of the Imperial Thunder Sect. This Zhong didn't know, please forgive me." That's right, the Imperial Thunder Sect was a big sect in the country of Xi. It wasn't something the Zhong family could afford to offend. Even if Xiaohua was really only an early-stage foundation establishment realm cultivator. Well said, well said. Xiaohua cupped his hands and said calmly, Senior Xiao. Zhong Haoren also flew to Xiaohua. He first greeted him very intimately, but when he saw that Xiaohua was already in the foundation establishment realm, he was slightly embarrassed and hurriedly changed his greeting. Xiaohua had a very good impression of this little cultivator. He said with a smile, Zhong Haoren, your progress is not small. Now you're already at the peak of the 12th layer of qi refining. You'll be able to step into the foundation establishment realm soon. Congratulations! A trace of pride flitted across Zhong Haoren's face, but it was immediately replaced by a slightly desolate expression. He smiled apologetically and said, How can Junior compare to Senior Xiao? Junior only advanced from the 10th layer of qi refining to the 12th layer, but Senior immediately entered the foundation establishment realm. This is what Junior yearned for day and night. Everyone has their own destiny. You can't force it. Xiaohua smiled. He then looked behind him and saw several unfamiliar disciples. He asked again, What about Zhong Xiuhan? Has she already entered the foundation establishment realm? No. The desolate expression on Zhong Haoren's face became even more pronounced. Senior sister hasn't entered the foundation establishment realm yet. And then she must be at the peak of the 12th layer of qi refining. Xiaohua nodded. Her aptitude seems to be better than yours. Yes, indeed, but... Zhong Haoren seemed to want to say something, but Zhong Peifu's gaze swept over him. He smiled and said, Fellow Taoist Xiao, my Zhong family's patriarch couldn't come to welcome you because of some worldly affairs. I hope fellow Taoists can understand. Come, fellow Taoists, please. Patriarch is waiting for you in the reception hall. As he said that, Zhong Peifu gave a meaningful glance to a quick-witted disciple behind Zhong Haoren. That disciple hastily turned around and flew away. Xiaohua followed Zhong Peifu and flew up. Xue followed behind him. Zhong Haoren hesitated for a moment, then stopped. He wanted to wait for Zhong Yejing to leave before following them. However, Xiaohua turned around and said, Zhong Haoren, your eyes old acquaintance. Come and accompany I. Zhong Haoren's face lit up with joy. Just as he was about to fly up, Zhong Peifu gave him another order. Cough, cough. Haoren, you're a junior. You can't accompany fellow Taoist Xiao. Follow behind your martial Aunt Jing. Yes, grandson understands. Zhong Haoren was silent. He nodded very calmly and silently stopped in midair. He waited for the others to fly up, and he followed behind them. Fellow Taoist Xiao, please. Zhong Peifu pointed at the scenery on the side as he walked. He said something in a low voice, but there wasn't any respect in his tone. After all, Xiaohua was only in the early stage of the foundation establishment realm. And he was at most a late-stage foundation establishment realm cultivator. Even if he was a disciple of the lightning-controlling sect, he couldn't really be respected by a late-stage foundation establishment realm cultivator. -8. Chapter 2102. Zhong Yejing, who was behind Xiaohua, clearly understood what was going on. She couldn't help but feel somewhat anxious in her heart. This Xiaohua was truly somewhat mysterious. Not only did he use a divine ability, but his actions of helping the people of the secular world made Zhong Yejing feel that Xiaohua was absolutely not a simple late-stage foundation establishment cultivator. Not long after, Xiaohua followed Zhong Peifu to the Zhongling mountain villa. It was a rather large gate, several times larger than the one Xiaohua had seen in the Kai family in Liyang. Moreover, just like the Kai family, there was a vermilion gate in the middle. In fact, it was actually a plaque. The word Zhong on the plaque was extremely large. It also looked strange and different from the usual style. It actually looked somewhat like an armor inscription. On both sides of the main door were two side doors. Although they were also vermilion red, they were much smaller. At this moment, the side door on the left was already wide open. Several aura refining disciples were standing there, dressed in bright clothes. Fellow Taoist Xiao! Zhong Peifu pointed at the main door and smiled. My Zhong clan's clan head is a golden core cultivator. Therefore, the main door of my Zhong clan can only be opened by the clan head when a golden core cultivator or above comes to visit the Zhong clan. Fellow Taoist Xiao, although you're a disciple of the Imperial Thunder sect, you still have to go through this side door. And it's fine. Xiao Hua seemed to have an extremely good temper. He didn't care about this kind of vulgar etiquette and nodded slightly. Please! Zhong Peifu gestured with his hand as he led Xiao Hua through the side door. Welcome to our Zhong clan, Senior Xiao! Several aura refining disciples bowed together. Their loud and clear voices soared into the sky. Ha! Xiao Hua slightly nodded. Fortunately. Seeing that Xiao Hua's face didn't have any particular displeasure, Zhong Yejing's heart calmed down a little. Among the cultivation aristocratic families, Xiao Hua had been to Luyang's Kai family and Misty Mountain's Ling family. Obviously, the Zhong family's structure was similar to the Kai family's, but the Zhong family's manner was far from comparable to the Kai family's. Not to mention the area it occupied, and not to mention the pavilions, terraces, and pavilions, but from time to time, immortal birds would appear, and from time to time, there would be strange flowers and plants by the side of the lake. This made Xiao Hua's eyes light up, and he knew that the Zhong family's foundation was also extraordinary. No matter what, the Zhong family's patriarch, Zhong Tianyao, was also a golden core cultivator. If the Zhong family did not have a solid foundation, it would be impossible for them to have such a patriarch. There was no need to elaborate on the scenery of the Zhongling Mountain Villa. Under Zhong Peifu's guidance, Xiao Hua arrived at a unique courtyard. Seeing Zhong Peifu walk straight in, Zhong Yejing frowned slightly. She sighed in her heart and regained her composure. She had already done what she could and said what she needed to say. This was all arranged by the patriarch, and she had nothing to say. Inside the courtyard was a quiet hall. It was also quite large. An old man with white hair sat in the middle of the hall. He was holding a book in his hand and his eyebrows were slightly furrowed. It was unknown whether he was reading or thinking. Beside the old man sat a skinny old man. He was in the late stage of foundation establishment. He had a bitter expression on his face, but it was impossible to tell what his expression was. Reporting to Patriarch, this is Xiao Hua of the Imperial Thunder sect. He is the cultivator that Jing'er brought here. Zhong Peifu bowed and said, Oh, so you're a disciple of the Imperial Thunder sect. Zhong Tianyao put down the book in his hand and swept his gaze over Xiao Hua. At the same time, he also used a spell to sense Xiao Hua's cultivation. He smiled and said, No wonder he could scare off a late-stage foundation establishment cultivator. This disciple of a large sect is indeed formidable. Junior Xiao Hua greets Senior Zhong. Xiao Hua didn't dare to neglect and bowed to greet Zhong Tianyao. And sit down. Zhong Tianyao pointed at Xiao Hua and said, Thank you, Senior, for granting me a seat. Xiao Hua modestly sat beside Xue Xue. Xue Xue lowered her head and didn't say a word. However, she was somewhat angry in her heart. She understood in her heart that even if she, an aura-refining cultivator, didn't reveal her identity, not to mention Xiao Hua. Since she had already revealed her identity, she represented the Imperial Thunder sect and the Zhong family to receive her in the real welcoming hall. Of course, the etiquette of an aura-refining cultivator towards a golden core cultivator was universal in the Xiaoyu continent, regardless of your identity. Zhong Tianyao receiving Xiao Hua here was rude in terms of etiquette. In terms of attitude, he was looking down on Xiao Hua. When the Zhong family disciple served the spirit tea, the cultivator at the side said, Jing Er, what you said in the summoning talisman was unclear. Now, explain the ins and outs of the matter in front of the master. Why are you with the disciples of Misty Cloud's sect and Su family? Yes, third uncle. Zhong Yejing glanced at Xiao Hua and was slightly apologetic. It seemed that there were some problems because she said something without Xiao Hua's consent. Zhong Yejing's expression naturally didn't escape Zhong Tianyao eyes, or perhaps Zhong Yejing wanted the clan head to see it. Following which, Zhong Yejing briefly recounted the matter of her looking for Su Hong, as well as the matter of White Bamboo Mountain. Of course, regarding the matter of the talisman, Zhong Yejing didn't mention it, only saying that Su Hong invited her to help. Zhong Peiyuan and the others heard clearly and knew that Zhong Yejing was hiding something in her words. However, they didn't ask too much. They only heard Zhong Peiyuan ask faintly, "So Su Hong's Qianmo's secret stone has already fallen into Xiao Hua's hands?" His gaze, however, drifted towards Xiao Hua. "Yes." "Good, it's been hard on you." "Jinger, you can leave." Zhong Peiyuan nodded. "But third uncle, Senior Xiao." Zhong Yejing didn't know what Xiao Hua was thinking. She didn't dare to mention the matter of the gold leaf in advance. At this time, she was a little anxious. "It's fellow Taoist Xiao, not Senior Xiao," Zhong Peiyuan said faintly. "Although my Yunqing Zhong family can't be compared to a famous sect, it's still a famous cultivation family in Meng country. There's no need to lower your status." "Yes, third uncle." Zhong Yejing felt a little wronged, but she didn't dare to contradict. She bowed, looked at Xiao Hua again, and retreated. "You all can leave too." Following the order, the other disciples also left. "Xiao Hua." Zhong Peiyuan stared at Xiao Hua and asked, "I don't want to know what you did at White Bamboo Mountain. Let me ask you, you took the Qianmo's secret stone from Su Hong's hands. Do you want to exchange it with my Zhong family? How do you know that my Zhong family needs Qianmo's secret stone? Do you want to use Qianmo's secret stone to threaten my Zhong family?" Xiao Hua was very funny. Zhong Yejing could clearly explain the matter, but Zhong Peiyuan didn't let her finish. Moreover, without waiting for him to speak, Zhong Peiyuan self-righteously put the hat of threatening on his head. Could it be that he really thinks that because his cultivation is high, he can distinguish right from wrong and can see through things at a glance? Xiao Hua couldn't help but criticize. However, Zhong Tianyao and Zhong Peifu both stared at Xiao Hua without blinking. Their eyes were full of vigilance, as if what Zhong Peiyuan said was their inner thoughts. Xiao Hua was very helpless. He cupped his hands and said, "Fellow Taoist Zhong misunderstood." Then, Xiao Hua told the matter of him meeting Zhong Peiyuan at the auction in Chius City. Finally, he smiled apologetically and said, "I didn't know that Miyu was fellow Taoist Zhong. Just as fellow Taoist Zhong said, when I heard that she wanted to exchange Qianmo's secret stone with Su Hong, my heart moved and I remembered this matter." "How did you know Haoran?" Zhong Peifu's eyes were still flickering as he asked in a low voice. "This is even more of a coincidence." Xiao Hua smiled and said, "I met him when I went to the Netherworld after leaving Chius City. And this old man knows." Zhong Peiyuan waved his hand and said, "Haoran seems to have mentioned this before, but this old man was in a bad mood at that time and didn't remember carefully." Then, Zhong Peiyuan looked at Xiao Hua and asked, "So, fellow Taoist Zhao's purpose is the 2 gold foil of my Zhong family?" "Yes, it's the 2 gold foil." Xiao Hua clapped his hands and took out a few pieces of Qianmo's secret stone. He smiled and said, "This Xiao found a few pieces of Qianmo's secret stone in the past few years to find the owner of the gold foil to exchange. Now as a coincidence, please take a look, Senior Zhong." Unexpectedly, Zhong Tianyao didn't seem to be interested in the Qianmo's secret stone. He scanned it with his divine sense and said indifferently, "Actually, the gold foil of my Zhong family is exchanged for the Qianmo's secret stone. The main thing is that I want to know what this gold foil is and what it's used for." "This?" Xiao Hua was startled. He looked at Zhong Tianyao a few times and shook his head. "Sorry, this is this Zhao's business. Forgive this Xiao for not telling you." "Oh?" Zhong Tianyao narrowed his eyes and said, "Since you can't tell this old man what the gold foil is used for, then this old man can't exchange with you with the gold foil." Senior Zhong. Xiaohua was anxious and said, "The gold foil is just a dead thing in the Zhong family. The Zhong family doesn't need it at all. Why can't you exchange it? Could it be that the Zhong family doesn't want to use the Qianmo's secret stone to repair magic tools? Humph, repairing magic tools or not is my Zhong family's business." Zhong Peiyuan sneered and said, "Could it be that fellow Taoist Xiao wants to forcefully exchange with my Zhong family? Hee, why can't I? Aren't the so-called big cultivation sects all like this? Without resorting to trickery, how can they become a big sect? How can they dominate a region?" Zhong Peifu said sarcastically. "Although the Imperial Thunder sect is far away in the country of Xi, their fame is spread throughout the entire Xiaoyu continent. Their disciples can even be arrogant in Meng country. What do you two fellow Taoists mean?" Xiaohua sneered. "If you don't want to exchange, then don't exchange. Why do you have to speak so viciously? These words are related to this Zhao's sect. Fellow Taoists, do you mind this Zhao bringing these words back? What? Did this Zhong offend the Imperial Thunder sect with just a few words?" Zhong Peiyuan stood up and said angrily, "Just based on these few words, Imperial Thunder sect dares to come to my Meng country and exterminate my Zhong family? Do you think you have this opportunity?" "Ha!" Xiaohua stood up and laughed loudly. He really felt that it was funny. A late Foundation establishment cultivator, no matter what, had a lifespan of several hundred years. He had seen many more things than him, but why did he look like a loose cultivator at the early qi refining stage? He didn't know the gravity of his words. "This Xiao wants to see what ability your Zhong clan has to keep this Xiao here," Xiaohua coldly said after he finished laughing. "At White Bamboo Mountain, you injured Su Hong and intimidated a late Foundation establishment cultivator. Was it just for Jing'er to see?" Zhong Tianyao said indifferently. "Even if you are a disciple of the Imperial Thunder sect, even if your cultivation is comparable to a late Foundation establishment cultivator, don't forget that this old man is a gold core cultivator. In this old man's eyes, you are just a child. Besides, without the clan head here, this old man and two late Foundation establishment cultivators can't kill a late Foundation establishment cultivator. Not to mention an qi refining cultivator?" Zhong Peiyuan said even more arrogantly. "Even if the late Foundation establishment cultivator escapes, will this qi refining female cultivator still be alive?" -8. Chapter 2103. Hearing these words, Xiaohua's face instantly turned cold, truly cold. There was no longer a trace of indifference in his original tone. "If fellow Taoist Zhong wants to try, then feel free to make a move. I don't have the confidence to protect my wife in front of a core formation cultivator. However, I am confident that I can escape from the hands of a golden core adept. As long as I leave, other than the golden core adepts of the Zhong family, I will not touch them. As for the other disciples, I will kill them all. Are you threatening me?" Zhong Tianyao's face was even colder. If his gaze could kill, it would have poked many holes in Xiaohua's body. At this moment, the dignity of a core formation cultivator was facing the provocation of an initial stage Foundation establishment cultivator. "Senior Zhong, can't you see that this junior is explaining the facts to fellow Taoist Zhong?" Xiaohua said word by word. "What this junior said is the truth. I didn't speak a word of nonsense." Good. Zhong Peiyuan laughed from extreme anger. He couldn't help but stand up. "Why are all the disciples of cultivation sects so arrogant? I won't say anything about the core formation cultivator from before. He opened his mouth and said that he would destroy my Zhong clan. You, an insignificant initial stage Foundation establishment cultivator, actually dares to be arrogant in front of me. Today, I'm going to stake it all. Even if I have to destroy jade and common stone, so what?" Xiaohua sneered. "Although words can be said casually, your hands can't be stretched out carelessly. Once you make a move, the consequences will be very serious." Seeing that Xiaohua only spoke and didn't make any moves, he was terrifyingly calm. Sure enough, Zhong Peiyuan was somewhat hesitant. The thought of stretching out his hand to release pressure could only flash through his mind again and again. Since the words had already been said, if he made a move, there was no possibility of probing. Xiaohua would definitely go all out in a spurt of energy like a tiger. Seeing Zhong Peiyuan stand up, Zhong Peifu naturally couldn't help but stand up as well. His gaze actually wasn't looking at Xiaohua, but rather at Shui Shui. Old second, old third. Zhong Tianao seemed to be doing his utmost to restrain himself. His grizzled hair and beard were trembling. At this moment, he slapped his hand on the chair and said angrily, "You two, shut up! You nearly caused trouble before, and now you still want to talk. Didn't you hear that the Imperial Thunder Sect's disciples want to challenge my Zhong clan? Could it be that you're waiting for me to make a move?" Hearing this, Zhong Peiyuan was pleasantly surprised. He slapped his forehead and released the pressure of a late-stage Foundation establishment cultivator. He smiled and said, "If that's the case, then this old man will teach this arrogant disciple a lesson on behalf of the Imperial Thunder Sect. Let him know the principle of respecting high-level cultivators." At the same time, Zhong Peifu wasn't slow either. He had already prepared his aura and slammed it towards Shui Shui. Seeing that the Zhong clan's people were really going to make a move, Xiaohua was furious. He reached out and pulled Shui Shui's little hand that was stretched out to the side. He transmitted his voice. "Don't use your transcendence energy." Shui Shui originally wanted to use the flight technique, but after hearing Xiaohua's words, she immediately stopped the flow of true qi. However, Xiaohua's figure flew up, and all of a sudden, he pulled Shui Shui into his arms. His other hand clapped, and the pressure of a middle-stage Foundation establishment cultivator was similarly released. With a boom, the pressure of two late-stage Foundation establishment cultivators collided with Xiaohua's pressure, setting off a burst of qi waves. "Humph, you're actually in the middle stage of the Foundation establishment realm. You've concealed it well." Zhong Tianao sat steadily on the seat of honor and released his divine sense. There wasn't any surprise on his face, and he only coldly snorted. However, what happened next shocked him. In his opinion, under the pressure of two late-stage Foundation establishment cultivators, wouldn't Xiaohua be helpless? Because pressure was something that couldn't be faked. However, Xiaohua's figure only trembled slightly, and then he swam like a fish. His figure slid slightly, and he flew towards the entrance of the hall. If it was a month ago, Xiaohua definitely wouldn't have such a method. He would definitely have released his Phoenix Dharma body and resisted. In other words, Xiaohua had some subtle understanding of the nameless secret art that matched his comprehension in the past 10 days. Although he couldn't further improve in concealing his cultivation level, he had a remarkable ability in evading pressure that others couldn't think of. "After coming to my Zhong clan, you still want to leave?" Zhong Tianyao waved his hand, but light flew out. It wasn't Xiaohua, but the four walls of the hall. Magic power rippled on the four walls, and a jade-green brilliance emerged from the center of the four walls. It was divided into two layers, one facing upwards and the other facing downwards, rapidly surging. Seeing that the pressure was ineffective, Zhong Peiyuan rubbed his hands, and several rays of brilliance flew out from his hands. Countless sparks were produced, and they flew toward Xiaohua's back. Humph. Xiaohua knew that Zhong Tianyao wouldn't directly make a move because of his status. He clapped his hands, and the soaring dragon scissors flew out of the space. A golden light flashed, and the soaring dragon scissors directly chopped towards the hall's entrance that was close at hand. With a rumbling sound, the jade-green brilliance that had already flooded the hall's entrance was split apart like a jade wave, and it rolled backwards. Not only that, the sharpness of the soaring dragon scissors also split open the entire hall's entrance. Amidst the sound, the hall's entrance and part of the hard stones were split open by the huge force, as if they were blown apart by a fireball talisman. "Three shameless old things!" Xiaohua's figure swayed rapidly, and in the blink of an eye, he already arrived at the hall's entrance. Quick! Zhong Tianyao also couldn't help but be greatly alarmed. He reprimanded in a low voice, And just as he was about to cast the spell, he saw Xiao Hua fling his hand without even turning his head. Hundreds of fireball talismans flew out, precisely blocking Zhong Peiyuan's cluster of sparks. Moreover, within those fireball talismans, there was also a wall of true samadhi fire that Xiao Hua cast. With a rumbling sound, it was as if the mountains were shaking and the earth was quaking. It was as if the entire hall was going to be overturned by the explosion. This explosion and wall of fire just happened to block Zhong Peiyuan and Zhong Peifu. Humph! Zhong Tianyao face slightly changed. He swung his sleeve, covering the entire fireball talisman and wall of fire. Like a whirlwind sweeping away clouds, all the fireballs and wall of fire disappeared. But it was also in this blink of an eye that Xiao Hua and Xue Xue's figures had already rushed out of the hall. By the time Zhong Peiyuan and Zhong Peifu flew out of the hall, Xiao Hua and Xue Xue's figures had already faded. In the sky above the entire Zhongling Mountain Villa, Xiao Hua's cold and eerie words floated. Since your Zhong family dares to make a move, then this young master won't be polite. Zhong Tianyao, just wait for this young master to kill your Zhong family's disciples one by one. Zhong Peiyuan and Zhong Peifu's noses were crooked from anger. If you say you want to escape, then escape. You actually let out such big words, and let the entire Zhongling Mountain Villa hear it. This was really a naked slap to their own face. How dare you! Zhong Peiyuan shouted. He simply didn't think and didn't even look at Zhong Peifu. His figure swayed, and he was about to fly out of the villa. On the other hand, Zhong Peifu's eyes turned, and he shouted, Patriarch, quickly open the villa's restrictive spell! Humph, all of you come back! Zhong Tianyao voice sounded, and his tone was also filled with shame and anger. -8. Chapter 2104. Zhong Peiyuan and Zhong Peifu looked at each other helplessly. Gritting their teeth, they floated down and landed in front of the hall that no longer had a door. At this time, several Zhong family disciples sneakily poked their heads out and looked over, not knowing what happened. What are you looking at? Why aren't you cleaning this place up? Zhong Peifu glared at them, an indescribable feeling in his heart. When they stood in front of Zhong Tianyao, they stole a glance at Zhong Tianyao's gloomy face. You talk too much. Will you die if you speak less? Zhong Tianyao shouted at Zhong Peiyuan. If you didn't stir up trouble, would this old man be so passive? It was like this before, and it was like this just now. Family head. Zhong Peiyuan felt extremely wrong. Boy was also unwilling. Who knows where he leaked the news and let that guy know? And this Imperial Thunder Sect brat is even more arrogant than that guy. Humph, cultivation sects are all sanctimonious things. Zhong Tianyao snorted coldly. But they are powerful, not something our cultivation sects can compare to. We can't afford to offend them, but can't we hide? Which cultivator would be able to tolerate such words from you? Moreover, Imperial Thunder Sect is famous for their flying techniques. You also saw it just now. Xiao Hua is only a middle-stage foundation establishment cultivator. His flying speed far surpasses yours. If this old man doesn't use his divine ability, I'm afraid I can't catch up to him. Zhong Tianyao didn't say anything. With a wave of his sleeve, he flew out of the hall. Second brother, you say, what's all this about? Zhong Peiyuan waved his hand, and the chairs beside him were destroyed. He sat down, picked up the teacup beside him, and drank the spiritual tea in one breath. Who knows? Zhong Peifu also gritted his teeth and sat down. We can't afford to offend that guy from before. A middle-stage foundation establishment cultivator came. We thought he could blow the sky apart. But who would have thought that not only was this guy's cultivation not bad, his magic treasure was also extremely powerful. Moreover, his ability to escape was even comparable to a Jin Dan. No wonder we brothers were defeated. Speaking up to hear, Zhong Peifu pondered for a moment, then said in a low voice. Third brother, Xiao Hua just said some ruthless words. Of course, we aren't afraid, but our Zhong family's disciples number in the thousands. None of them are Xiao Hua's match. Shouldn't we make some preparations? Zhong Peiyuan frowned for a moment before he smiled. There's no need for that. After all, we didn't hurt his lover. He didn't have any reason to lower himself and hurt a disciple of our Zhong family. I think he's just saying it casually. He's also a disciple of the Imperial Thunder sect. He wouldn't be so shameless. That's true. Since the Patriarch didn't order us to do anything about it, we don't have to worry about it. Zhong Peifu nodded. We'd better think of another way. Damn it, that's right. How can we not think of a way? Zhong Peiyuan naturally knew what Zhong Peifu was talking about. He said fiercely, My Zhong family has been accumulating things for decades, or even hundreds of years, and they were taken away by that bastard in an instant. How can we not be angry? That artifact was passed down from my ancestors and is related to the bloodline of my Zhong family. If it can be repaired successfully, it will be able to awaken the true spirit bloodline of my clansmen. It's extremely important to my Zhong family. We can't not repair it. If that Xiaohua had come a few years earlier, my Zhong family would have been able to obtain the last Qianmo's secret stone. We would have already started to repair the artifact. Zhong Peifu sighed. AI, it's really fate that makes fools of people. It's too late to say anything now. Zhong Peiyuan waved his hand. We'll rest for a while and continue to collect. How could it be so simple? Zhong Peifu curled his lips. The most difficult Qianmo's secret stone, what? Is Xiaohua the only one in the Xiaoyu continent who has the Qianmo's secret stone? Zhong Peiyuan said angrily. Even you want to blame this old man? No, how could it be? Zhong Peifu smiled apologetically. Third brother has worked hard and taken many risks. He's the one who has contributed the most to my Zhong family. Let's go, let's go. Zhong Peiyuan was a little dispirited. He waved his hand and walked out of the hall with his hands behind his back. After the two of them left, the disciples of the Zhong family naturally rushed over to repair the hall that was destroyed by Xiaohua. Seeing how badly damaged the hall was, the disciples of the Zhong family were all dumbfounded. Of course, they knew how powerful the restrictive spell in the hall was. While they were guessing in a low voice, Xiaohua's fame quickly spread throughout the Zhongling mountain villa. Shui only knew that Xiaohua's flying speed was extremely fast. However, when she truly experienced the speed, she realized that she had underestimated Xiaohua's flying speed. She only felt the scenery in front of her fly away at an extremely fast speed. Her vision blurred for a moment. Her figure had already flown out of the Zhongling mountain villa, while Xiaohua slowly stopped in midair. Husband! Xiaohua's hand was still around Shue's waist. His brows were slightly wrinkled as he looked at the Zhongling mountain villa in the distance. No one knew what he was thinking. Shui asked in a low voice. Husband won't really kill the disciples of the Zhong family, right? Hee, of course not. Xiaohua withdrew his gaze and said with a smile. When have you seen your husband kill people indiscriminately? Your husband is just angry that Zhong Peiyuan actually used my wife's safety to threaten your husband and randomly scared them. Exactly. That Zhong family's patriarch is really rude. He himself doesn't know the use of the gold leaf and instead forced my husband to say it. If he knew the use of the gold leaf, why would he still exchange it? Shui also echoed. Even if they knew the use of the gold leaf, they wouldn't be able to use it. Xiaohua coldly snorted. However, your husband feels that he won't leak the use of the gold leaf. Then what do we do now? Shui slightly wrinkled her brows. We've already fallen out with the Zhong family. Zhong Tianyao will definitely not exchange the gold leaf with my husband. If he doesn't want to exchange, then so be it. From his tone, I'm afraid that he was forced to do something he didn't want to do. He didn't have the ability to get back at them and instead wanted to vent his anger on this young master. How can this young master let them have their way? Xiaohua curled his lips and said, Since they did it, then they can't blame this young master for doing it 15 times. Eh? Husband, what do you think? Shui somewhat strangely asked. In her heart, Xiaohua had always advocated being straightforward and upright. She couldn't think of any reason that Xiaohua had to persuade Zhong Tianyao to exchange with him. What do I think? No idea. Xiaohua spread out his hands with a helpless look. Wouldn't it be fine if your husband went over and snatched the gold leaf? Ah? Shui covered her mouth. What Xiaohua said was indeed a common method used by cultivators. However, this most common method coming from Xiaohua's mouth really made Shui feel strange. She couldn't help but ask, "Husband, this kind of action doesn't seem to be your usual behavior. What does your husband usually do?" Xiaohua said with a smile. Husband has always prioritized others. Husband has never used the strong to bully the weak. Husband has never done things that harm others for his own benefit. Ha! Xiaohua stuck out his chest, raised his head, and patted his chest. He laughed and said, "I didn't expect your husband to be so perfect in your eyes." "Of course," Shui said proudly. "Husband is the most perfect male cultivator in Xiaoyu continent. How could other cultivators work for people in the secular world who starve to death? Just based on this, husband can make all the female cultivators have a whole new level of respect for you. Hee, so that's how it is. I was wondering why my wife would say such a thing." Xiaohua suddenly said, "Your husband isn't a stickler for rules. For the sake of other people's opinions, I don't care about my own benefits. This is a completely different matter from caring for the common people." "Eh? Why?" Shui was somewhat puzzled. Xiaohua pointed his finger and said, "That gold leaf obviously has no use in the Zhong family. They just treated it as an ordinary thing and threw it in the ancestral hall. Your husband didn't harm their benefits by taking it, so why can't I? Besides, this gold leaf is extremely important to your husband's cultivation. Even if it harms the Zhong family's benefits, it can still be exchanged for the benefits of more people. Your husband naturally has to take it." Hee, husband's reason seems to be what every cultivator thinks when they do this, Shui said with a smile. However, she didn't go into detail. She knew that Xiaohua had a sense of propriety, so she was somewhat worried. If there were only 2 late-stage foundation establishment cultivators, I wouldn't be worried. However, the Zhong family's patriarch is a golden core cultivator. Husband must be careful. Hee, isn't it just a small Zhong family? Xiaohua swept a glance at the distant Zhongling mountain villa and thought with a sneer, "This young master really isn't afraid. Besides, the Zhong family's disciples actually threaten my wife's life in front of me. If I don't teach them a lesson, how can I let them know how powerful your husband is?" "All right." Shui's eyes looked at Xiaohua. A strange expression flickered in her eyes. She seemed to have sensed that an incomparably sharp awl was gradually appearing. Anyone who ignored this sharp awl would most likely be injured by this awl. Immediately, Xiaohua smiled and said to Shui, "Let's go, my wife. We'll go further away from here. This place is really a dragon's pool and a tiger's den." Hee. Shui was originally somewhat depressed. She felt that she was holding Xiaohua back. At this moment, she smiled and said, "Since it's a dragon's pool and a tiger's den, you can even charge out. Your husband is a hero who punched the South Mountain sky-eyed tiger and stepped on the North Sea's tide dragon. How can I be afraid of these small shrimps?" Xiaohua pulled Shui and flew far away. He still didn't forget to tease the Zhong family. Shui originally thought that Xiaohua would find a place to stop around the Zhong family. However, she didn't expect that Xiaohua would fly for dozens of li without any intention of stopping. She couldn't help but be surprised and asked, "Husband, where are we going? Won't we be far away if we continue flying?" "Oh, your husband thought about it just now. We just finished threatening them. If we go to look for the gold leaf now, I'm afraid that they'll be on guard. Maybe the gold leaf is still on Zhong Tianyao. Your husband can only get the gold leaf if I kill Zhong Tianyao." Xiaohua smiled and said, "Rather than that, it's better to wait for them to forget about this matter. Your husband can secretly come back and take it away. Then, we'll find a place to meditate. My wife, you should meditate first. Familiarize yourself with the cultivation method again so that you can find an opportunity to consume the Ling Lei pill. Your husband will go take a look around and send some good seeds to the secular people near Yun City. Xiaohua said. If you like this work, you're welcome to come to Qidian. -8. Chapter 2105. Shui thought for a moment and nodded. Husband, go ahead. I fly slowly and my cultivation base is also shallow. I can only be your stumbling block. Don't worry about it. After you build your foundation, you'll be powerful. Xiaohua comforted her. Just based on the medicinal power of the Ling Lei pill, your husband can guess a thing or two. I hope so. Shui smiled sweetly. I want to lend my husband a hand. Thus, Xiaohua found a secret place and set up the rabbit formation. He let Shui go into seclusion inside while he flew out and went to the surroundings of Yun City. There, he distributed the good seeds that had been piled up like a mountain to the many secular people. To the north of the country of Xi, there were endless hills. The hills were high and low, undulating continuously. Low thorny vegetation covered the hills, piercing sharply into the air in the cold wind. Somewhere, where the sun was shining brightly, a thick fog suddenly rose up. That thick fog quickly dispersed with the cold wind. Wherever the fog passed, the thorns on the hills were dyed with a layer of light brown. That brown color was similar to the color of the thorns. Not to mention the naked eye, even if one's divine sense swept over, it would be impossible to see clearly if one didn't examine it carefully. Immediately after, 1,000 feet away, another thick fog rose up, still floating in the surrounding area of several hundred feet. This process was repeated over and over again. Waves of thick fog rose up and slowly pushed forward. After an unknown period of time, the last wave of fog fell and a hazy figure appeared from the fog. It was the mysterious black-cloaked fellow Taoist from the eastern mountain. Haha! Fellow Taoist from East Mountain's gaze swept past the thorns and let out a satisfied laugh. Then, he carefully bent down and looked at the thorns and the hills again. With a wave of his hand, he took out a dark green object. That object was more than 3 inches long, sparkling and translucent, faintly emitting a luster. Fellow Taoist from East Mountain touched that object to the thorns, but the brown color on the thorns changed slightly, as if it was transferred to the dark green object. The entire object turned completely brown, its brilliance faded, and the luster also disappeared, turning into a withered branch. Fellow Taoist Eastern Mountain didn't wait for the object's brilliance to fade. He immediately flicked his hand, and the object fell to the ground with a bang. It was extremely hard. Heh. Fellow Taoist East Mountain was very pleased with the result. He leaped up, and as if he were climbing a flight of stairs, he took a few steps up into the air. Then, his body began to fade away as he flew toward the area surrounded by the black fog. Shockingly, the black fog covered an area of over 50 kilometers. However, even though it was hundreds of miles long, it seemed so insignificant in the face of this boundless hilly land. Fellow Taoist East Mountain? After flying for dozens of miles, Fairy Yinghua was frowning slightly as she stood in midair. Below her, there were thousands of Foundation Establishment stage disciples holding all kinds of strange materials in their hands. Their hands were forming strange seals, and from time to time, a faint green light flashed. As the green light bloomed, the materials disappeared on the ground or in midair. Fairy Yinghua seemed to have sensed something. She exclaimed softly and looked up. Heh, fellow Taoist Yinghua's cultivation has indeed improved. Fellow Taoist Eastern Mountain's figure appeared in Fairy Yinghua's eyes. If it was 10 years ago, fellow Taoist definitely wouldn't be able to sense Ai's aura. That's right. Fairy Yinghua nodded slightly. Under fellow Taoist's guidance, my cultivation has really made some inconceivable progress. However, this progress seems to be somewhat unequal to my Xianyan school's contribution. Fairy Yinghua's brows relaxed as she looked below her. All right, I'll let fellow Taoist Yinghua know. Fellow Taoist Eastern Mountain didn't seem to be angry. He smiled and said, I can clearly see fellow Taoist's contribution, And I also understand that I will definitely not go back on my words. I will definitely help fellow Taoists distract your attention. Furthermore, fellow Taoist Eastern Mountain glanced at the thousands of people below his feet, and said, Fellow Taoist Ingshua, although you spent a lot of effort to collect these materials for setting up the formation, I completely handed over this desolate spirit capture formation to fellow Taoist. Not only did fellow Taoist obtain this ancient formation for free, these thousands of Foundation Establishment disciples have also learned the Tao of formation from I's secret manual. For the development of Xiunyan School. Fellow Taoist Ingshua, don't say that you have no use at all. Heh. Fairy Ingshua smiled and nodded. It's precisely because of this that I will use the strength of the entire school to help fellow Taoist Eastern Mountain. It's just that. Fellow Taoist Eastern Mountain, I have some doubts. Fellow Taoist has to deal with. Who is it? With fellow Taoist's magic power, don't tell me, you still have to go through so much trouble. Fairy Ingshua hesitated for a moment, and asked via voice transmission. Fellow Taoist Eastern Mountain's face turned cold. Although his entire body was hidden in a cloak, Fairy Ingshua could clearly feel the surrounding temperature drop. She heard a faint voice. Fellow Taoist Ingshua, according to our agreement, you can't know about this matter. Furthermore, with your current cultivation, knowing about this matter will only bring you disadvantages and not benefits. Why do you have to be so nosy? Fairy Ingshua was a bit embarrassed, and the corner of her mouth curled up. I will use the strength of the entire school, so naturally I have to consider the situation of Xiunyan School. If there is something that harms the foundation of our humble school, I will have to consider it. Fellow Taoist Eastern Mountain seemed to be thinking, and after a moment he said, What I do, no one in the Xiaoyu continent will know. Don't worry, when you enter the deity transformation stage, perhaps you will have the qualifications to know some things. I also want to see the situation and tell you some things. Oh? Your school's disciples really have a foundation. This formation seems to be about to be completed. Is that so? When Fairy Ingshua heard this, her face lit up with joy. She used her divine sense and said, This 8 Desolation Spirit Detention Formation has been set up for several years, and it is finally about to be completed. I also want to see the might of this ancient formation. Haha, fellow Taoist Ingshua, I'm afraid you can't see it yet. Fellow Taoist Eastern Mountain laughed heartily, seeming to be in an extremely good mood. After this 8 Desolation Spirit Detention Formation is set up, it still needs to slowly absorb the spiritual chi of heaven and earth, gradually smoothing out the formation's imperfections, and fusing the formation's traces with the heavens and earth. Only then can it be used. Otherwise, if even fellow Taoists can see the formation's traces, how can I's enemies fall into the trap? There's this kind of trouble? Fairy Ingshua was a bit flabbergasted. I thought that it was rare to see a formation that could be set up for 100 miles. Who would have thought that this formation actually needs to absorb the spiritual chi of heaven and earth? Of course. I see that the existing formations on your Xiaoyu continent are all formation tools like formation plates and formation flags. The spiritual chi of heaven and earth used by those formations is stored in the formation tools beforehand. The fluctuations of these spiritual chi of heaven and earth are different from the surrounding spiritual chi of heaven and earth. It is extremely easy for others to see. I's formation emphasizes on fusion, using the surrounding spiritual chi of heaven and earth as its foundation. Fellow Taoists can still see the formation's traces now, but after several months to half a year, you definitely won't be able to sense it with your divine sense. Fellow Taoist Eastern Mountain said proudly. Otherwise, how could I let fellow Taoists collect so many rare materials? -8. Chapter 2106. Sigh, I can be considered ignorant in front of fellow Taoist East Mountain. Fairy Ingshua sighed. Hee. Fellow Taoist East Mountain flew to the center of the 8 Desolate Spirit Capture Formation and scanned the entire formation with his divine sense. He was very satisfied and transmitted his voice. In half a day, this formation will take shape. At that time, fellow Taoist Ingzhua will lead your sect's disciples according to the previous plan and withdraw from all directions. I will then use the final spell to activate the formation. Oh, is it the spell that consumes a lot of magic power and divine sense at the end of fellow Taoist East Mountain's formation? Fairy Ingzhua asked thoughtfully. That's right. After using these spells, I will consume a lot of my own power. I have no choice but to find a place to meditate first. Fellow Taoist East Mountain nodded and said, Fellow Taoist Ingzhua, during this period, you still have to diligently inquire about that person's whereabouts. Yes, I understand. When Fairy Ingzhua said this, she looked like she wanted to say something but hesitated. What? Fellow Taoist Ingzhua doesn't believe in I? Fellow Taoist East Mountain was very sensitive, and noticed this and asked curiously. That's not it. Fairy Ingzhua thought for a while and transmitted her voice. I only received a tip from a disciple. Ever since we got a clue about that person, my Xuanyan sect has done its best to pay attention to that person's whereabouts. In order to not be discovered by that person, we used countless methods. It's really exhausting. Furthermore, I can't guarantee that I won't be discovered. This isn't what fellow Taoists should consider. Fellow Taoist East Mountain waved his hand and said, That person's magic power is profound. Even if he was discovered, it wouldn't be surprising. What I want to say is that that person's whereabouts are uncertain, as if he's looking for something. Fairy Ingzhua clenched her teeth and said, Hee, fellow Taoist Ingzhua also noticed? Fellow Taoist East Mountain laughed and said, I can't answer this question because I also don't know what that person is looking for. And it's precisely because I sensed that this person was looking for something that I had no choice but to make a move. If that person finds that thing for I'm afraid it would be an abnormal disaster. I had no choice but to make a move in advance. Oh, I see. Fairy Ingzhua nodded slightly, as if this was the first time she had heard such news from fellow Taoist East Mountain. About half a day later, the sun had already set in the western mountains. The gorgeous blood-red color burned through the western sky, casting a dusky light over the hills. Fairy Ingzhua and the other Xuanyan disciples gradually flew away, like flies leaving their nest. They scattered in twos and threes in all directions. When everyone was far away and their divine senses could not reach, they saw fellow Taoist of Eastern Mountain's body tremble and quickly rush into the sky. When he reached a height of several hundred feet, his body suddenly stopped. His divine sense was like a torrential flood, covering an area of 100 miles, scanning inch by inch. Only after 2 hours did his divine sense stop. Fellow Taoist East Mountain then clapped his hands, and a green formation diagram several feet in size appeared in his hands. Fellow Taoist East Mountain shook his hand, and the formation diagram unfurled in the air. At this time, it could be seen clearly that the formation diagram was actually made up of pieces of green seal text. These green seal texts seemed to be separated from each other, but also seemed to have a mysterious connection, forming the entire formation diagram. Pooh! Fellow Taoist East Mountain opened his mouth and spat out a mouthful of green blood on the formation diagram. The green brilliance on the formation diagram became brighter, and in the evening sky, it appeared extremely strange. The formation diagram appeared with the brilliance, and it became increasingly larger, gradually turning from several feet to several feet, and then gradually expanding again. At this time, fellow Taoist East Mountain's body began to tremble again, and a series of cryptic syllables came out from his cloak. As the syllables rushed into the formation diagram, the green seal text scattered in all directions like tadpoles leaving their nest, and the formation diagram was enlarged again. What was inconceivable was that as the green seal text swam in the air, many strange phenomena flashed in the air. Clusters of green light accompanied by wisps of black fog appeared in the void, entangling the green seal text. Sounds like the wailing of ghosts came from the void. A pitch-black color, darker than the night sky, first appeared, then condensed, forming thin threads, 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 and even thin threads. Rumble. The faint sound of thunder came from the sky above the formation diagram, which was already close to 100 miles in size. It seemed that many strange phenomena had attracted the might of the heavens, but the thunder and lightning were extremely weak, and only lit up this part of the sky a little. Seeing the green light mixed with the black mist and the green seal text, fellow Taoist East Mountain raised his head and let out a long howl. His body trembled violently again, and two identical fellow Taoists of East Mountain separated. This was clearly a spirit-severing cultivator's ability. However, to everyone's surprise, the two fellow Taoists of East Mountain swayed again, and actually split into four. The four cloaked fellow Taoists of East Mountain flew to the four corners of the formation diagram, and at the same time, used the green seal text. At this time, along with four rhythmic syllables, four flame-like green lights flew out from the four corners of the formation diagram, and clustered around the feet of the four fellow Taoists of East Mountain. The four fellow Taoists of East Mountain waved their hands, and there were also faint green seal text syllables. Along with the fellow Taoists of East Mountain's arms, the four green lights rushed to the center of the formation diagram. Pun! With an earth-shattering sound, the four green lights collided and instantly turned into countless dots of fluorescent light. The fluorescent light fell like raindrops and sprinkled over the entire array diagram. The green seal text and the dots of ink that had appeared before merged into the fluorescent light and fell with it. Thus, the entire formation diagram slowly fell, and gradually merged with the formation that had been set up before. Go! The four fellow Taoists of East Mountain shouted at the same time, and their 8 hands rubbed together. Large amounts of spiritual energy of heaven and earth gathered together, and as the seals were cast, they scattered over the formation diagram. Rumble! The earth shook, and the entire ground shook. Endless dust rose into the sky, covering half of the sky within 100 miles. As the dust gradually settled, the jade-green brilliance and the pitch-black ink spots gradually disappeared. The entire array diagram had completely disappeared. Phew! The four fellow Taoists of East Mountain let out a sigh of relief at the same time, and then they raised their heads to the sky and laughed. Ha! Then, the four figures rushed to the center of the formation, and gradually merged into one person. The fellow Taoist of East Mountain, who had just turned into one person, swayed slightly, as if he had used up too much of his magic power. Humph! Fellow Taoist of East Mountain snorted coldly, and his figure flickered, like a ripple, and disappeared in midair. The entire night sky returned to its deathly stillness. Apart from the wind, there was only darkness. The moon had just risen, and the moonlight scattered down, dispelling the darkness. However, the hills within 100 miles were no different from the other hills. Even if one scanned it with their divine sense or looked with their naked eyes, they would absolutely not be able to find any clues. The hills in the north of the country of Shi regained its peace, which had not been there for several years. However, in the Meng Kingdom's Yun City, the Zhong family's Zhongling Mountain villa could not calm down. Ah! A shocked cry rang out from a slope in the north of the villa. There were several rows of huts on this slope, and in front of the huts were patches of medicinal fields. In the darkness of the night, the spirit herbs shook their spirits, absorbing the moonlight and spiritual energy. What's going on? Who's making so much noise? Several patrolling disciples flying in midair heard the noise and flew over. Senior brother, senior brother! An anxious voice rang out, and a young disciple broke through the door of one of the huts. He almost rolled on the ground as he cried out. Dead, dead, what are you shouting for? One of the patrolling disciples scolded. What dead? They're all dead, all dead. The young disciple pointed his finger incoherently, and said with extreme fear. When the other disciples heard this, they frowned. The disciple at the front patted his hand warily, and took out a yellow talisman. He said in a low voice, Calm down! We've already passed by. You should explain the situation clearly. At this moment, the lights in the surrounding huts lit up. Several disciples had already poked their heads out of the huts, wanting to see what was going on. All of you stay in the huts. Don't make a sound. The patrolling disciples shouted loudly, preventing everyone from coming out. Huff, huff, huff. The disciple who had screamed took a few deep breaths, and the horror on his face had not disappeared. He whispered incoherently, "The people in my hut are all dead." "What? All dead? There were 5 people in your hut." The patrolling disciple was shocked and turned to look at the hut. "Yes, for living senior brothers are all dead." The disciple came back to his senses and said in horror, "I was talking to them just now. Because I didn't eat well last night, I had a stomachache. When I returned to the hut, the 4 brothers in the hut were all dead. And they died in an extremely horrible way." Hiss. The patrolling disciple took a deep breath and looked at the hut in front of him. His mood was very complicated. Obviously, this disciple had said something that he had never encountered in the past 10 years of patrolling. Immediately, the patrolling disciple did not dare to be negligent. He ordered another disciple to go back and inform the others. He then activated the yellow talisman in his hand and walked steadily towards the hut where the light was coming from. With the sound of the door, the patrolling disciple pushed open the door that he had closed and looked around. He saw that it was a hut about 5 feet wide. 5 heatable beds were placed in the 4 corners of the hut, and a bean oil lamp swayed on the table in front of the window. The flickering shadow moved in the hut, and in the light and shadow, the corpses of 4 young disciples with ashen faces were reflected in the eyes of the patrolling disciple. Although the patrolling disciple had made some preparations, he still could not help but exclaim softly when he saw the horrified and distorted faces of the 4 disciples. The hands of the 4 disciples were stretched out, as if they were trying to grab something. Their fingers were slightly curled, and their nails were black and tight. The eyes of the 4 disciples were staring straight at the door. Their eyes were wide open and filled with disbelief, as if they had seen something terrifying. Their lips were already dripping with blood, obviously bitten by the disciples' teeth. -8. Chapter 2107. The 4 disciples who had died tragically were looking at the door. The disciples on duty who had just stepped into the room saw the 8 dead fishes' eyes and their hair stood on end. Fear rose from the bottom of their hearts. The disciple on duty was afraid, but he didn't dare to be negligent. He first scanned the entire room, and when he didn't find anything unusual, he walked to the disciple closest to the door. After a brief inspection, he frowned slightly, because he didn't see any injuries on the disciple's body. "How is it?" At this moment, a deep voice sounded. "Did you find any clues? Captain Zhongyu?" The disciple on duty showed a relaxed expression and hurriedly turned around and bowed. A middle-aged cultivator in his 40s with thick eyebrows and big eyes steadily stepped into the room. This cultivator's cultivation was around the 11th layer of the qi refining realm. Zhongyu raised his hand and motioned for the disciples on duty to stand up. He asked, "Did you find anything unusual?" "No." The disciple on duty shook his head slightly. "This subordinate did a rough check and found that they might have been poisoned to death. But I didn't find any injuries. This subordinate can't say for sure." "Did anything happen tonight?" "No, it was the same as before. There was no movement at all." Hearing this, Zhongyu's frown deepened. He had been the captain of the Zhongling Mountain Villa for decades, but this was the first time he had encountered such a strange thing. It was also the first time he had encountered so many low-level disciples dying at once. "Let the coroner come and take a closer look." Zhongyu turned around and ordered. One of the disciples on duty quickly walked away. Zhongyu looked around the room again and asked, "Tell me the details of the situation." "Yes, Captain." The disciple on duty pointed outside and said in a low voice, "There is still a surviving disciple outside. This subordinate will let him speak." Let him in." Zhongyu nodded, but the disciple on duty had just taken 2 steps when Zhongyu shouted again, "No need, this old man will go and ask him myself." "Yes." By the time Zhongyu arrived in front of the surviving disciple, he had already recovered some of his spirit, but his eyes were still a little dazed. Zhongyu looked at this disciple and muttered in his heart, He knew that although there were some disciples of the Zhong clan amongst these disciples, most of them were disciples of other surnames that were related to the Zhong clan. There were even some villagers with some natural endowments near Zhongling Mountain Villa. Their aptitudes weren't too good, but they could still cultivate. Most of them were around the third layer of qi refining. Because they couldn't advance any further, they were assigned to the medicinal garden. Although these disciples would receive guidance from the Zhong family's disciples on their cultivation, their true purpose was to plant spirit herbs and do some chores in the Zhongling Mountain Villa. Although their status was higher than that of ordinary servants, they would never be noticed by others. Therefore, they would not be involved in anything that targeted the Zhong family. Tell this old man the ins and outs of the matter in detail. Zhong Yu looked at the disciple with clear eyes. Yes. The disciple licked his dry lips and repeated the story. This time, it was clearly more detailed than before, and his tone was much calmer. However, the matter was simple to begin with. No matter how detailed it was impossible to loosen Zhong Yu's brows. You're saying that you only went out for a short moment, and when you returned, the 4 of them were all dead? You didn't see anything out of the ordinary? Zhong Yu asked. Yes, this disciple really didn't. The disciple was about to blurt out when he suddenly thought of something. He hesitated and said, No, this disciple seems to have seen a black shadow. It was faster than a bird, but I couldn't see it clearly at night. This disciple doesn't know if this disciple saw wrongly. Oh? A black shadow? How big was it? Where did it fly to? Zhong Yu's face lit up with joy. The disciple stretched out his hand and gestured to the size of his palm. However, he seemed to feel that something was wrong, so he enlarged his hand again. Then, he felt that something was wrong again, so he enlarged his hand again. When he reached the size of a foot, he hesitated and said, This big, this disciple was really sleepy and didn't see it clearly. Where did the black shadow fly to? It seemed to be over there. The disciple was still hesitant and pointed uncertainly at another row of small houses. This is bad. When Zhong Yu saw the disciple pointing at another house, his heart immediately sank. He said anxiously, Zhong Huan, quickly go and gather all the disciples in the herb garden. Captain, it's already late at night. The disciple on duty whispered, Don't gather all the disciples. However, at this point, the disciple named Zhong Huan seemed to have realized something and exclaimed, Captain, could it be, only now did you remember? How dare you rely on this old man's usual guidance? Zhong Yu snorted coldly. Yes. Zhong Huan hurriedly waved his hand and asked the disciples on duty to wake up all the disciples who were resting in the herb garden and gather them. After a while, Zhong Huan walked over with a slightly dark face. How is it? Zhong Yu asked indifferently when he saw Zhong Huan's expression. Captain, you know that the disciples in 3 houses are all dead, Zhong Huan said in a low voice. They died in the same way as these 4. This subordinate also took a rough look and didn't find anything unusual. 15 disciples? Zhong Yu's expression changed drastically. Yes, 15 disciples. Including these 4, there are 19 disciples. Zhong Huan nodded slightly. At this moment, a loud sound rang out in the air above the Zhongling Mountain Villa in the distance. It was as if millions of firecrackers had been lit up one after another. Following the sound, clusters of brilliance flashed in the night sky. Who touched the mountain villa's restriction? Zhong Yu was shocked. He didn't have time to ask his subordinate about the situation and activated the flying talisman to rush into the air. However, just as he flew up, he heard an extremely angry voice like rolling thunder. Where did this evil creature come from? How dare you break into my Zhong family's ancestral hall? Then, another burst of dazzling fire appeared, and a thunderous sound was heard. Ah? Third granduncle's magic weapon? Zhong Yu was shocked and his body paused in midair. He knew that Zhong Peiyuan's cultivation was in the late stage of foundation establishment. With him attacking, how could he stand by the side? Even if he went, he would only die. Ha ha, old Zhong, of course it's me. Xiaohua's slightly exaggerated voice sounded at the same time. Then, Zhong Yu saw a golden light flash in front of his eyes. The golden light was so bright and sharp that it almost blinded his eyes. He couldn't help but close his eyes. Slash! A sound was heard. It was unpleasant to the ear, as if silk was being cut. Then, he heard Zhong Peiyuan's angry roar. Xiaohua! You are really bold! -8. Chapter 2108. This young master said that if you make this young master angry, this young master will kill everyone in your Zhong family one by one. If you want this young master to calm down. Xiaohua's voice suddenly came closer. Zhong Yu was shocked and hurriedly landed. Humph! The spiritual energy of heaven and earth surged, and then condensed together with that cold snort. Hee! A sneer flew over Zhong Yu's head. It was so fast that Zhong Yu had just opened his eyes and couldn't see it clearly. I owe this. Zhong Yu was somewhat enlightened. Isn't this the black shadow that disciple mentioned just now? Moreover, didn't this black shadow say that he would kill everyone in the Zhong family one by one? Could it be, this is the Xiaohua that spread throughout the Zhong family a few days ago? Zhong Yu didn't have time to turn around and ask the surviving disciple when he saw two figures chasing after Xiaohua. Even in Zhong Yu's eyes, the speed of these two people was much slower than Xiaohua's. Patriarch? Third granduncle. Zhong Yu moaned sorrowfully. How could he investigate a person who could make a late-stage foundation establishment, and an early-stage golden core cultivator join hands to chase after him? Finished thinking, Zhong Yu swallowed his saliva and turned to ask the surviving disciple. Did you see that black shadow just now? Was it the one you saw just now? I saw it. The fear on the disciple's face hadn't disappeared, and his fingers were trembling. Yes, it looked like it, but what? Zhong Yu asked anxiously. But it didn't look as fast as just now, the surviving disciple said with some hesitation. Of course, just now he was killing someone, and now he's running for his life. Of course it's a lot faster, Zhong Yu said without hesitation. Look at that figure, is it the same? It's this size. The surviving disciple raised his hands, and the gap between his hands was a bit wider. After about half a cup of tea's time, two figures flew over from a distance. Zhong Tianyao voice also came over in a low voice. Old Third, how's your magic weapon? This old man seems to have seen it being injured by that guy's magic weapon. And Zhong Peiyuan's voice was somewhat distressed. Good, Patriarch knows that Guy Xiaohua's magic weapon is extremely powerful. Boy's magic weapon wasn't his match, and it was broken just now. If the boy wants to repair it, I'm afraid it will take a long time. Damn it! Xiaohua, this bastard! Zhong Tianyao voice was also angry. This bastard's cultivation is indeed not bad. Jinger's message is also not a false report. Relying on this magic treasure, he can resist a late-stage foundation establishment cultivator with a middle-stage foundation establishment cultivation. Moreover, his thunder-controlling sex disciples are proficient in flying techniques, and this brat's technique, even this old man can't catch up. If he goes against my Zhong family, it will be really troublesome. The most hateful thing is that Xiaohua was actually able to touch the ancestral hall and break through several defensive array formations. If not for the last array formation, wouldn't he have entered the ancestral hall? Zhong Peiyuan also felt some lingering fear at this time. And, since I've already fallen out with Xiaohua, I have to be tough to the end. Zhong Tianyao sneered. Even if we have to reconcile in the end, we have to let him know that this is Meng country, and he's just a middle-stage foundation establishment cultivator. My Zhong family isn't a place where he can behave atrociously. Humph, you still want to kill my Zhong family's disciples one by one. Give him more guts. Give him 10 times his cultivation. Zhong Peiyuan said angrily. Who is this? As Zhong Tianyao spoke, he saw a figure in front of him flying over in a somewhat cowering manner. Oh, it's my Zhongling Mountain Villa's disciple on duty. Zhong Peiyuan seemed to have some impression of Zhong Yu. He raised his voice and said, Zhong Yu, go back to your duty. This is not a place where you can meddle. Yes, disciple understands. Zhong Yu bowed and said, However, disciple has something to ask third granduncle to go over and take a look. Oh? What matter do you need this old man to go over? Zhong Peiyuan was stunned for a moment. His divine sense swept towards Zhong Yu's back and those low-level disciples gathered together. Ah? This is… Zhong Peiyuan was stunned. His face also changed greatly as he turned his head to look at Zhong Tianyao. Patriarch. And this old man has already seen it. Zhong Tianyao's face had never been as gloomy as this 2 times. His eyes flashed as he stared at Zhong Yu. You said that this was done by that bastard Xiaohua? Zhong Yu trembled. Zhong Tianyu's gaze was really too sharp. He hurriedly bowed and said, Yes, Patriarch knows. This subordinate has already asked the surviving disciple. Although I'm not completely sure. However, that figure, that speed, and the time when the disciple was killed. Also, that bastard's arrogant words. When Xiaohua's arrogant words were mentioned, Zhong Tianyao was so angry that he flung his sleeves and said, Old third, you take a look. Was it done by Xiaohua? If that's the case, you send out disciples. And you and second brother personally go out and see where that bastard is hiding. Even if you can't find him, you have to find that female disciple of the Imperial Thunder sect. This old man wants to see who is more powerful in my main country and my Zhongling mountain villa. Yes, disciple understands. Zhong Peiyuan hurriedly bowed and saluted. At this moment, Zhong Peifu and the others also rushed over. Zhong Tianyao didn't even look at them and coldly left. Third brother, what's going on? Zhong Peifu naturally also saw the abnormality in the medicinal garden. He secretly glanced at Zhong Tianyu's back and asked. Zhong Peiyuan rolled his eyes a few times and ordered, Call Zhong Yejing over. This old man has something to ask her. A disciple on duty complied and activated a flying talisman and left. Zhong Peiyuan transmitted a few words to Zhong Peifu. Zhong Peifu's face showed anger, and his figure descended. He and Zhong Peiyuan looked around and asked the coroner, the surviving disciple, and the disciple on duty a few questions. Other than knowing that the 19 disciples died from poison, they didn't find any other clues. Third great uncle! Zhong Yejing quickly flew over. Obviously, she had already asked the disciple on duty on the way. When she saw the tragic deaths of the disciples, she couldn't help but feel a little sad. Look at what you've done! Zhong Peiyuan said without any trace of politeness. If you didn't bring Xiaohua here, how could my Zhong family lose so many people? These low-level disciples are also my Zhong family's disciples. Third great uncle knows. Zhong Yejing frowned and said, Junior feels that this is definitely not Xiaohua's doing. If it wasn't him, then who could it be? He just admitted it. Zhong Peifu sneered. Third great uncle knows. Zhong Yejing shook her head. Xiaohua did it for the 2 gold sheets. He probably went to the ancestral hall because he heard the news that Junior occasionally revealed. As for the words he said, they should be words of anger. Because in the 10 days that Junior traveled with him, his compassion for the state of the universe and the fate of mankind, as well as the realm where he places the lives of ordinary people in his eyes, is far from what we cultivators can compare to. How could such a benevolent cultivator casually kill people? The realm where he placed the lives of ordinary people in his eyes? Zhong Peiyuan asked curiously. What do you mean? Zhong Yejing didn't hesitate to tell him what Xiaohua did, and finally said, Third great uncle, what kind of cultivator would do such a thing? Junior knows that I can't do it. TSK, a person fishing for fame. Without waiting for Zhong Peiyuan to answer, Zhong Peifu mocked. A group of ordinary people, ant-like existences, how could a cultivator care about them? That Xiaohua only told you about it, and went by himself. You didn't follow him, so what did you do? Second great uncle, Junior's divine sense has seen it before. Zhong Yejing retorted. Humph, I reckon it was for you to see. Zhong Peifu said without any trace of politeness. Before he came here, He was already plotting against my Zhong family. He wanted to use such an illusion to confuse you so that he could obtain my Zhong family's gold leaf. Second great uncle, Zhong Yejing said anxiously. If you don't believe me, you can send someone to investigate. Xiao Hua hasn't shown up for more than 10 days, so he must be helping those ordinary people around my Zhongling mountain villa. Humph, why should I care about this when I have nothing better to do? Zhong Peifu said again. Patriarch has already ordered me to capture the other disciple of the Imperial Thunder Sect. I don't have time. Besides, Jinger, you're a disciple of the Zhong family. How can you help an outsider? Second great uncle, Zhong Yejing said anxiously. Boy is afraid that second great uncle will only pay attention to Xiao Hua and let the real culprit go, harming the lives of my Zhong family's disciples. You can go now. Without waiting for Zhong Yejing to say anything, Zhong Peiyuan waved his hand and said, Gather all the disciples in the Zhongling Mountain Villa who are at the foundation establishment stage and above. Those who are in closed-door cultivation should also come out. Before Xiao Hua is captured, be on high alert. Don't let anything go wrong. Yes, boy understands. Zhong Yejing nodded sadly and flew away. Zhong Peifu and Zhong Peiyuan checked for a while, but they couldn't find anything. They gave a few instructions to the disciples on duty and went back. Although the disciples in the herb garden had dispersed, everyone was anxious. A terrifying atmosphere spread throughout the herb garden, so much so that the entire Zhongling mountain villa began to tense up. Fortunately, after more than 10 days there were no more movements from Xiao Hua, and there were no abnormalities. Even the disciples of the Zhong family who went out to look for Xiao Hua and Xue Xue came up empty-handed. It seemed that Xiao Hua and Xue Xue had already left Yun City and went somewhere else. Therefore, the tense hearts of the people in the Zhongling mountain villa began to gradually relax. Then, it was another moonless night. The Zhongling mountain villa was shrouded in darkness. Occasionally, a few lights came from a few small houses, making the villa look even more desolate. Help! Suddenly, a mournful cry for help sounded from the south of the villa. And this cry for help came to an abrupt end, and there was no more sound. Let's go! Zhong Yu, who was on duty and had his attention on the herb garden, heard the voice and immediately said in shock, This is the place where the family members live. How could this guy rush into the inner residence? Yes, Xiao Hua was a foundation establishment cultivator. How could he go to the inner residence of the Zhong family to harass the family members? However, a strange thing happened again. Zhong Yu had just flown for a few breaths with the disciples on duty when there was a rumbling sound of magic tools colliding with each other in the southwest of the Zhongling mountain villa. At the same time, Zhong Yu's familiar voice echoed arrogantly in the air above the Zhongling mountain villa. Ha ha ha, old Zhong, so your Zhongling mountain villa has a place to refine magic tools. You hit it so well, no wonder you were so confident in repairing your ancestral magic tools. If this young master hadn't stumbled upon it by accident, I wouldn't have been able to discover your Zhong family's secret. -8. You're tuning into the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.